Chapter 1 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. How the black sheep came forth from the fold. The great bell of Beaulieu was ringing. Far away through the forest might be heard its musical clangor and swell. Peat cutters on Blackdown and fishers upon the Exe heard the distant throbbing rising and falling upon the sultry summer air. It was a common sound in those parts, as common as the chatter of the jays and the booming of the bittern. Yet the fishers and the peasants raised their heads and looked questions at each other, for the Angelus had already gone, and vespers was still far off. Why should the great bell of Beaulieu toll when the shadows were neither short nor long? All round the abbey the monks were trooping in. Under the long green paved avenues of gnarled oaks and of lichened beeches the white robed brothers gathered to the sound. From the vineyard and the vine press, from the bouverie or ox farm, from the marl pits and salterns, even from the distant ironworks of Soley and the outlying grange of St. Leonard's, they had all turned their steps homewards. It had been no sudden call. A swift messenger had the night before sped round to the outlying dependencies of the abbey, and had left the summons for every monk to be back in the cloisters by the 3rd hour after noontide. So urgent a message had not been issued within the memory of the old lay brother Athanasius, who had cleaned the abbey knocker since the year after the battle of Bannockburn. A stranger who knew nothing either of the abbey or of its immense resources might have gathered from the appearance of the brothers some conception of the varied duties which they were called upon to perform, and of the busy wide-spread life which centred in the old monastery. As they swept gravely in by twos and by threes, with bended heads and muttering lips, there were few who did not bear upon them some signs of their daily toil. Here were two with wrists and sleeves all spotted with the ruddy grape juice. There again was a bearded brother with a broad-headed axe and a bundle of faggots upon his shoulders, while beside him walked another with the shears under his arm and the white wool still clinging to his whiter gown. A long straggling troop bore spades and mattocks, while the two rearmost of all staggered along under a huge basket of fresh caught carp. For the morrow was Friday, and there were 50 platters to be filled, and as many sturdy trenchermen behind them. Of all the throng there was scarce one who was not labour stained and weary, for Abbot Berghersh was a hard man to himself and to others. Meanwhile, in the broad and lofty chamber set apart for occasions of import, the Abbot himself was pacing impatiently backwards and forwards, with his long, white, nervous hands clasped in front of him. His thin, thought-worn features and sunken, haggard cheeks bespoke one who had indeed beaten down that inner foe whom every man must face, but had none the less suffered sorely in the contest. In crushing his passions he had well nigh crushed himself. Yet, frail as was his person, there gleamed out ever and anon from under his drooping brows a flash of fierce energy, which recalled to men's minds that he came of a fighting stock, and that even now his twin brother, Sir Bartholomew Berghersh, was one of the most famous of those stern warriors who had planted the cross of St. George before the gates of Paris. With lips compressed and clouded brow, he strode up and down the oaken floor, the very genius and impersonation of asceticism, while the great bell still thundered and clanged above his head. At last the uproar died away in 3 last measured throbs, and ere their echo ceased the Abbot struck a small gong which summoned a lay brother to his presence. "Have the brethren come?" he asked, in the Anglo-French dialect used in religious houses. "They are here," the other answered, with his eyes cast down and his hands crossed upon his chest. "All?" 32 of the seniors and 15 of the novices, most holy father." Brother Mark of the Spicarium is sore smitten with a fever and could not come. He said that it boots not what he said. Fever or no, he should have come at my call. His spirit must be chastened, as must that of many more in this abbey. You yourself, brother Francis, have twice raised your voice, so it hath come to my ears, when the reader in the refectory hath been dealing with the lives of God's most blessed saints. What hast thou to say?" The lay brother stood meek and silent, with his arms still crossed in front of him. 1,000 Aves and as many Credos, said standing with arms outstretched before the shrine of the Virgin, may help thee to remember that the Creator hath given us 2 ears and but 1 mouth, as a token that there is twice the work for the one as for the other. Where is the master of the novices?" "He is without, most holy father." "Send him hither." The sandalled feet clattered upon the wooden floor, and the iron bound door creaked upon its hinges. In a few moments it opened again to admit a short, square monk, with a heavy, composed face and an authoritative manner. "You have sent for me, holy father." "Yes, brother Jerome. I wish that this matter be disposed of with as little scandal as may be, and yet it is needful that the example should be a public one." The abbot spoke in Latin now, as a language which was more fitted by its age and solemnity to convey the thoughts of 2 high dignitaries of the order. "It would perchance be best that the novices be not admitted," suggested the master. "This mention of a woman may turn their minds from their pious meditations to worldly and evil thoughts." "Woman, woman!" groaned the abbot. "Well has the holy Chrysostom termed them radix malorum. From Eve downwards, what good hath come of any of them? Who brings the plaint?" "It is brother Ambrose, a holy and devout young man, a light and pattern to every novice." "Let the matter be brought to an issue, then, according to our old time monastic habit. Bid the chancellor and the sub chancellor lead in the brothers according to age, together with brother John, the accused, and brother Ambrose, the accuser." "And the novices?" "Let them bide in the north alley of the cloisters. Stay, bid the sub chancellor send out to them Thomas the lector to read unto them from the Gesta Beati Benedicti. It may save them from foolish and pernicious babbling." The abbot was left to himself once more, and bent his thin grey face over his illuminated breviary. So he remained until the senior monks filed slowly and sedately into the chamber, seating themselves upon the long oaken benches which lined the wall on either side. At the further end, in 2 high chairs, as large as that of the abbot, though hardly as elaborately carved, sat the master of the novices and the chancellor. The latter a broad and portly priest, with dark mirthful eyes and a thick outgrowth of crisp black hair all round his tonsured head. Between them stood a lean, white faced brother, who appeared to be ill at ease, shifting his feet from side to side and tapping his chin nervously with the long parchment roll which he held in his hand. The abbot, from his point of vantage, looked down on the 2 long lines of faces, placid and sun-browned for the most part, with the large bovine eyes and unlined features which told of their easy, unchanging existence. Then he turned his eager, fiery gaze upon the pale-faced monk who faced him. "This plaint is thine, as I learn, brother Ambrose," said he. "May the holy Benedict, patron of our house, be present this day and aid us in our findings." "How many counts are there?" "3, most holy father," the brother answered in a low and quavering voice. "Have you set them forth according to rule?" "They are here set down, most holy father, upon a cantle of sheepskin." "Let the sheepskin be handed to the chancellor. Bring in brother John, and let him hear the plaints which have been urged against him." At this order a lay brother swung open the door, and 2 other lay brothers entered, leading between them a young novice of the order. He was a man of huge stature, dark eyed and red headed, with a peculiar half humorous, half defiant expression upon his bold, well marked features. His cowl was thrown back upon his shoulders, and his gown, unfastened at the top, disclosed a round, sinewy neck, ruddy and corded like the bark of the fir. Thick, muscular arms, covered with a reddish down, protruded from the wide sleeves of his habit, while his white shirt, looped up on one side, gave a glimpse of a huge knotty leg, scarred and torn with the scratches of brambles. With a bow to the Abbot which had in it perhaps more pleasantry than reverence, the novice strode across to the carved prie dieu which had been set apart for him, and stood silent and erect with his hand upon the gold bell which was used in the private orisons of the Abbot's own household. His dark eyes glanced rapidly over the assembly, and finally settled with a grim and menacing twinkle upon the face of his accuser. The chancellor rose, and having slowly unrolled the parchment scroll, proceeded to read it out in a thick and pompous voice, while a subdued rustle and movement among the brothers bespoke the interest with which they followed the proceedings. Charges brought upon the second Thursday after the feast of the Assumption, in the year of our Lord 1366, against Brother John, formerly known as Hordle John, or John of Hordle, but now a novice in the holy monastic order of the Cistercians, read upon the same day at the Abbey of Beaulieu in the presence of the most reverend Abbot Berkirch and of the assembled order. The charges against the said Brother John are the following, namely, to wit: first, that on the above mentioned feast of the Assumption, small beer having been served to the novices in the proportion of 1 quart to each 4, the said Brother John did drain the pot at one draught, to the detriment of Brother Paul, Brother Porphyry, and Brother Ambrose, who could scarce eat their known meat of salted stock fish on account of their exceeding dryness. At this solemn indictment the novice raised his hand and twitched his lip, while even the placid senior brothers glanced across at each other and coughed to cover their amusement. The Abbot alone sat grey and immutable, with a drawn face and a brooding eye. Item, that having been told by the master of the novices that he should restrict his food for 2 days to a single 3-pound loaf of bran and beans, for the greater honouring and glorifying of Saint Monica, mother of the holy Augustine, he was heard by Brother Ambrose and others to say that he wished 20,000 devils would fly away with the said Monica, mother of the holy Augustine, or any other saint who came between a man and his meat. Item, that upon Brother Ambrose reproving him for this blasphemous wish, he did hold the said brother face downwards over the piscatorium, or fish pond, for the space during which the said brother was able to repeat a pater and 4 aves, for the better fortifying of his soul against impending death. There was a buzz and a murmur among the white frocked brethren at this grave charge, but the Abbot held up his long quivering hand. "What then?" said he. "Item, that between nones and vespers on the feast of James the Less, the said Brother John was observed upon the Brockenhurst road, near the spot which is known as Hatchet's Pond, in converse with a person of the other sex, being a maiden of the name of Mary Sowley, the daughter of the king's verderer. Item, that after sundry japes and jokes the said Brother John did lift up the said Mary Sowley, and did take, carry and convey her across a stream, to the infinite relish of the devil and the exceeding detriment of his own soul, which scandalous and wilful falling away was witnessed by 3 members of our order." A dead silence throughout the room, with a rolling of heads and upturning of eyes, bespoke the pious horror of the community. The Abbot drew his grey brows low over his fiercely questioning eyes. "Who can vouch for this thing?" he asked. "That can I," answered the accuser. "So too can Brother Porphyry, who was with me, and Brother Mark of the Spicarium, who hath been so much stirred and inwardly troubled by the sight that he now lies in a fever through it." "And the woman?" asked the Abbot. "Did she not break into lamentation and woe that a brother should so demean himself?" "Nay," She smiled sweetly upon him and thanked him. I can vouch it, and so can brother Porphyry." "Canst thou?" cried the Abbot in a high tempestuous tone. "Canst thou so? Hast forgotten that the 35th rule of the order is that in the presence of a woman the face should be ever averted and the eyes cast down? Hast forgot it, I say? If your eyes were upon your sandals, how came ye to see this smile of which ye prate? A week in your cells, false brethren, a week of rye bread and lentils, with double lauds and double matins, may help ye to remember the laws under which ye live." At this sudden outflame of wrath the two witnesses sank their faces on to their chests, and sat as men crushed. The Abbot turned his angry eyes away from them and bent them upon the accused, who met his searching gaze with a firm and composed face. "What hast thou to say, brother John, upon these weighty things which are urged against you?" "Little enough, good father, little enough," said the novice, speaking English with a broad West Saxon drawl. The brothers, who were English to a man, pricked up their ears at the sound of this homely and yet unfamiliar speech. But the Abbot flushed red with anger and struck his hand upon the oaken arm of his chair. "What talk is this?" he cried. "Is this a tongue to be used within the walls of an old and well famed monastery? But grace and learning have ever gone hand in hand, and when one is lost it is needless to look for the other." "I don't know about that," said brother John. "I know only that the words come kindly to my mouth, for it was the speech of my fathers before me. Under your favour I shall either use it now or hold my peace." The Abbot patted his foot and nodded his head, as one who passes a point but does not forget it. "For the matter of the ale," continued brother John, "I had come in hot from the fields, and had scarce got the taste of the thing before mine eye lit upon the bottom of the pot. It may be, too, that I spoke somewhat shortly concerning the bran and beans, the same being poor provender and unfitting for a man of my inches. It is true also that I did lay my hands upon this jack fool of a brother Ambrose, though, as you can see, I did him little scathe. As regards the maid, too, it is true that I did heft her over the stream, she having on her hosen and shoon, whilst I had but my wooden sandals, which could take no hurt from the water. I should have thought shame upon my manhood, as well as my monkhood, if I had held back my hand from her." He glanced around as he spoke, with the half amused look which he had worn during the whole proceedings. "There is no need to go further," said the Abbot. "He has confessed to all. It only remains for me to portion out the punishment which is due to his evil conduct." He rose, and the two long lines of brothers followed his example, looking sideways with scared faces at the angry prelate. "John of Hordle," he thundered, "you have shown yourself during the 2 months of your novitiate to be a recreant monk, and one who is unworthy to wear the white garb which is the outer symbol of the spotless spirit. That dress shall therefore be stripped from thee, and thou shalt be cast into the outer world without benefit of clerkship, and without lot or part in the graces and blessings of those who dwell under the care of the blessed Benedict. Thou shalt come back neither to Beaulieu nor to any of the granges of Beaulieu, and thy name shall be struck off the scrolls of the order." The sentence appeared a terrible one to the older monks, who had become so used to the safe and regular life of the abbey that they would have been as helpless as children in the outer world. From their pious oasis they looked dreamily out at the desert of life, a place full of stormings and strivings, comfortless, restless, and overshadowed by evil. The young novice, however, appeared to have other thoughts, for his eyes sparkled and his smile broadened. It needed but that to add fresh fuel to the fiery mood of the prelate. "So much for thy spiritual punishment," he cried, "but it is to thy grosser feelings that we must turn in such natures as thine, and as thou art no longer under the shield of Holy Church, there is the less difficulty. Ho there! Lay brothers, Francis, Naomi, Joseph, seize him and bind his arms. Drag him forth, and let the foresters and the porters scourge him from the precincts." As these three brothers advanced towards him to carry out the Abbot's direction, the smile faded from the novice's face, and he glanced right and left with his fierce brown eyes, like a bull at a baiting. Then, with a sudden deep chested shout, he tore up the heavy oaken prie dieu and poised it ready to strike, taking 2 steps backwards the while, that none might take him at advantage. "By the black rood of Waltham," he roared, "if any knave among you lays a finger end upon the edge of my gown, I will crush his skull like a filbert." With his thick knotted arms, his thundering voice, and his bristle of red hair, there was something so repellent in the man that the three brothers flew back at the very glare of him, and the 2 rows of white monks strained away from him like poplars in a tempest. The Abbot only sprang forward with shining eyes, but the chancellor and the master hung upon either arm and wrested him back out of danger's way. "He is possessed of a devil!" they shouted. "Run, brother Ambrose, brother Joachim! Call Hugh of the Mill and Woodman Wat and Raoul with his arbalest and bolts. Tell them that we are in fear of our lives. Run, run, for the love of the Virgin!" But the novice was a strategist as well as a man of action. Springing forward, he hurled his unwieldy weapon at brother Ambrose, and, as desk and monk clattered to the floor together, he sprung through the open door and down the winding stair. Sleepy old brother Athanasius at the porter's cell had a fleeting vision of twinkling feet and flying skirts, but before he had time to rub his eyes the recreant had passed the lodge and was speeding as fast as his sandals could patter along the Lyndhurst road. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 2. How Alleyn Edricson came out into the world. Never had the peaceful atmosphere of the old Cistercian house been so rudely ruffled. Never had there been insurrection so sudden, so short, and so successful. Yet the Abbot Berghersh was a man of too firm a grain to allow one bold outbreak to imperil the settled order of his great household. In a few hot and bitter words he compared their false brother's exit to the expulsion of our first parents from the garden, and more than hinted that unless a reformation occurred, some others of the community might find themselves in the same evil and perilous case. Having thus pointed the moral and reduced his flock to a fitting state of docility, he dismissed them once more to their labours, and withdrew himself to his own private chamber, there to seek spiritual aid in the discharge of the duties of his high office. The Abbot was still on his knees when a gentle tapping at the door of his cell broke in upon his orisons. Rising in no very good humour at the interruption, he gave the word to enter, but his look of impatience softened down into a pleasant and paternal smile as his eyes fell upon his visitor. He was a thin-faced, yellow-haired youth, rather above the middle size, comely and well shapen, with straight, lithe figure and eager, boyish features. His clear, pensive grey eyes and quick, delicate expression spoke of a nature which had unfolded far from the boisterous joys and sorrows of the world. Yet there was a set of the mouth and a prominence of the chin which relieved him of any trace of effeminacy. Impulsive he might be, enthusiastic, sensitive, with something sympathetic and adaptive in his disposition, but an observer of nature's tokens would have confidently pledged himself that there was native firmness and strength underlying his gentle monk-bred ways. The youth was not clad in monastic garb, but in lay attire, though his jerkin, cloak, and hose were all of a sombre hue, as befitted one who dwelt in sacred precincts. A broad leather strap hanging from his shoulder supported a scrip or satchel, such as travellers were wont to carry. In one hand he grasped a thick staff, pointed and shod with metal, while in the other he held his coif or bonnet, which bore in its front a broad pewter medal stamped with the image of Our Lady of Rocamadour. "Art ready then, fair son?" said the Abbot. "This is indeed a day of comings and goings. It is strange that in 112 hours the Abbey should have cast off its foulest weed, and should now lose what we are fain to look upon as our choicest blossom." "You speak too kindly, father," the youth answered. "If I had my will I should never go forth, but should end my days here in Beaulieu. It hath been my home as far back as my mind can carry me, and it is a sore thing for me to have to leave it." "Life brings many a cross," said the Abbot gently. "Who is without them? Your going forth is a grief to us as well as to yourself. But there is no help. I had given my forward and sacred promise to your father, Edric the Franklin, that at the age of 20 you should be sent out into the world to see for yourself how you liked the savour of it. Seat thee upon the settle, Alleyn, for you may need rest ere long." The youth sat down as directed, but reluctantly and with diffidence. The Abbot stood by the narrow window, and his long black shadow fell slantwise across the rush strewn floor. "20 years ago," he said, "your father, the Franklin of Minstead, died, leaving to the Abbey 3 hides of rich land in the hundred of Malwood, and leaving to us also his infant son, on condition that we should rear him until he came to man's estate. This he did partly because your mother was dead, and partly because your eldest brother, now Socman of Minstead, had already given sign of that fierce and rude nature which would make him no fit companion for you. It was his desire and request, however, that you should not remain in the cloisters, but should, at a ripe age, return into the world." "But, father," interrupted the young man, "it is surely true that I am already advanced several degrees in clerkship." "Yes, fair son, but not so far as to bar you from the garb you now wear, or the life which you must now lead. You have been porter?" "Yes, father." "Exorcist?" "Yes, father." "Reader?" "Yes, father." "Acolyte?" "Yes, father." "But have sworn no vow of constancy or chastity?" "No, father." "Then you are free to follow a worldly life. But let me hear, ere you start, what gifts you take away with you from Beaulieu. Some I already know. There is the playing of the citole and the rebec. Our choir will be dumb without you. You carve too." The youth's pale face flushed with the pride of the skilled workman. "Yes, holy father," he answered. "Thanks to good brother Bartholomew, I carve in wood and in ivory, and can do something also in silver and in bronze. From brother Francis I have learned to paint on vellum, on glass and on metal, with the knowledge of those pigments and the essences which can preserve the colour against damp or a biting air. Brother Luke hath given me some skill in damask work, and in the enamelling of shrines, tabernacles, diptychs and triptychs. For the rest I know a little of the making of covers, the cutting of precious stones, and the fashioning of instruments." "A goodly list, truly!" cried the superior with a smile. "What clerk of Cambrig or Oxenford could say as much? But of thy reading hast not so much to show there, I fear." "No, father, it hath been slight enough. Yet, thanks to our good chancellor, I am not wholly unlettered. I have read Ockham, Bradwardine, and other of the schoolmen, together with the learned Duns Scotus and the Book of the Holy Aquinas. But of the things of this world, what have you gathered from your reading? From this high window you may catch a glimpse over the wooden point and the smoke of Bucklershard, or the mouth of the Exe and the shining sea. Now, I pray you, Alleyne, if a man were to take a ship and spread sail across yonder waters, where might he hope to arrive?" The youth pondered, and drew a plan amongst the rushes with the point of his staff. "Holy father," said he would come upon those parts of France which are held by the King's Majesty. But if he tended to the south he might reach Spain and the Barbary States. To his north would be Flanders and the country of the Eastlanders and of the Muscovites." "True. And how if, after reaching the king's possessions, he still journeyed on to the eastward?" "He would then come upon that part of France which is still in dispute, and he might hope to reach the famous city of Avignon, where dwells our blessed father, the prop of Christendom." "And then?" He would pass through the land of the Almains and the great Roman Empire, and so to the country of the Huns and the Lithuanian pagans, beyond which lies the great city of Constantine and the kingdoms of the unclean followers of Mahmud. And beyond that, fair son, beyond that is Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and the great river which hath its source in the Garden of Eden." "And then?" "Nay, good father, I cannot tell. Methinks the end of the world is not far from there." "Then we can still find something to teach thee, Alleyne," said the Abbot complacently. "Know that many strange nations lie betwixt there and the end of the world. There is the country of the Amazons, and the country of the dwarfs, and the country of the fair but evil women who slay with beholding, like the basilisk. Beyond that again is the kingdom of Prester John and of the great Cham. These things I know for very sooth, for I had them from the pious Christian and valiant knight, Sir John de Mandeville, who stopped twice at Beaulieu on his way to and from Southampton, and discoursed to us concerning what he had seen from the reader's desk in the refectory, until there were many a good brother who got neither bit nor sup, so stricken were they by his strange tales." "I would fain know, father," asked the young man, "what they may be at the end of the world." "There are some things," replied the Abbot gravely, "into which it was never intended that we should inquire. But you have a long road before you. Whither will you first turn?" "To my brother's at Minstead. If he be indeed an ungodly and violent man, there is the more need that I should seek him out and see whether I cannot turn him to better ways." The Abbot shook his head. "The Socman of Minstead hath earned an evil name over the country side," he said. "If you must go to him, see at least that he doth not turn you from the narrow path upon which you have learned to tread. But you are in God's keeping, and Godward should you ever look in danger and in trouble. Above all, shun the snares of women, for they are ever set for the foolish feet of the young. Kneel down, my child, and take an old man's blessing." Alleyn Edricson bent his head while the Abbot poured out his heartfelt supplication that Heaven would watch over this young soul now going forth into the darkness and danger of the world. It was no mere form for either of them. To them the outside life of mankind did indeed seem to be one of violence and of sin, beset with physical and still more with spiritual danger. Heaven, too, was very near to them in those days. God's direct agency was seen in the thunder and the rainbow, the whirlwind and the lightning. To the believer, clouds of angels and confessors and martyrs, armies of the sainted and the saved, were ever stooping on their struggling brethren upon the earth, raising, encouraging and supporting them. It was then with a lighter heart and a stouter courage that the young man turned from the Abbot's room, while the latter, following him to the stairhead, finally commended him to the protection of the holy Julian, patron of travellers. Underneath, in the porch of the abbey, the monks had gathered to give him a last godspeed. Many had brought some parting token by which he should remember them. There was brother Bartholomew, with a crucifix of rare carved ivory, and brother Luke, with a white backed psalter adorned with golden bees, and brother Francis, with the slaying of the innocents most daintily set forth upon vellum. All these were duly packed away deep in the traveller's scrip, and above them old pippin faced brother Athanasius had placed a parcel of simnel bread and rammel cheese, with a small flask of the famous blue sealed abbey wine. So, amid handshakings and laughings and blessings, Alleyn Edricson turned his back upon Beaulieu. At the turn of the road he stopped and gazed back. There was the widespread building which he knew so well, the Abbot's house, the long church, the cloisters with their line of arches, all bathed and mellowed in the evening sun. There too was the broad sweep of the river Exe, the old stone well, the canopied niche of the Virgin, and in the centre of all the cluster of white robed figures who waved their hands to him. A sudden mist swam up before the young man's eyes, and he turned away upon his journey with a heavy heart and a choking throat. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 3. How Honourable John cozened the Fuller of Lymington. It is not, however, in the nature of things that a lad of 20, with young life glowing in his veins and all the wide world before him, should spend his first hours of freedom in mourning for what he had left. Long ere Alleyn was out of sound of the Beaulieu bells, he was striding sturdily along, swinging his staff and whistling as merry as the birds in the thicket. It was an evening to raise a man's heart. The sun shining slantwise through the trees threw delicate traceries across the road, with bars of golden light between. Away in the distance, before and behind, the green boughs, now turning in places to a coppery redness, shot their broad arches across the track. The still summer air was heavy with the resinous smell of the great forest. Here and there a tawny brook prattled out from among the underwood, and lost itself again in the ferns and brambles upon the further side. Save the dull piping of insects and the sough of the leaves, there was silence everywhere, the sweet, restful silence of nature. And yet there was no want of life. The whole wide wood was full of it. Now it was a lithe, furtive stoat which shot across the path on some fell errand of its own. Then it was a wild cat which squatted upon the outlying branch of an oak and peeped at the traveller with a yellow and dubious eye. Once it was a wild sow which scuttled out of the bracken with two young sounders at her heels, and once a lordly red stag walked daintily out from among the tree trunks and looked around him with the fearless gaze of one who lived under the king's own high protection. Alleyn gave his staff a merry flourish, however, and the red deer bethought him that the king was far off, so streaked away from whence he came. The youth had now journeyed considerably beyond the furthest domains of the abbey. He was the more surprised, therefore, when, on coming round a turn in the path, he perceived a man clad in the familiar garb of the order, and seated in a clump of heather by the roadside. Alleyn had known every brother well, but this was a face which was new to him, a face which was very red and puffed, working this way and that, as though the man was sore perplexed in his mind. Once he shook both hands furiously in the air, and twice he sprang from his seat and hurried down the road. When he rose, however, Alleyn observed that his robe was much too long and loose for him in every direction, trailing upon the ground and bagging about his ankles, so that even with trussed up skirts he could make little progress. He ran once, but the long gown clogging him so that he slowed down into a shambling walk, and finally plumped into the heather once more. "Young friend," said he, when Alleyn was abreast of him, "I fear from thy garb thou canst know little of the Abbey of Beaulieu." "You are in error, my friend," the clerk answered, "for I have spent all my days within its walls." "Hast so indeed?" cried he. "Then perhaps canst tell me the name of a great loathly lump of a brother, with freckled face and a hand like a spade. His eyes were black and his hair was red and his voice like a parish bull. I trow there cannot be two alike in the same cloisters." "That can surely be no other than brother John," said Alleyn. "I trust he has done you no wrong, that you should be so hot against him." "Wrong, quotha?" cried the other, jumping out of the heather. "Wrong? Why, he hath stolen every plack of clothing off my back, if that be a wrong, and hath left me here in this sorry frock of white folding, so that I have shame to go back to my wife, lest she think that I have donned her old kirtle. Harrow and alas, that I should ever have met him." "But how camest this?" asked the young clerk, who could scarce keep from laughter at the sight of the hot little man so swathed in the great white cloak. "It came this way," he said, sitting down once more. "I was passing this way, hoping to reach Lymington ere nightfall, when I came on this red headed knave, seated even where we are sitting now. I uncovered and louted as I passed, thinking that he might be a holy man at his orisons, but he called to me and asked me if I had heard speak of the new indulgence in favour of the Cistercians. 'Not I,' I answered. 'Then the worse for thy soul,' said he, and with that he broke into a long tale how that, on account of the virtues of the Abbot Berghersh, it had been decreed by the Pope that whoever should wear the habit of a monk of Beaulieu for as long as he might say the 7 Psalms of David should be assured of the kingdom of heaven. When I heard this I prayed him on my knees that he would give me the use of his gown, which, after many contentions, he at last agreed to do, on my paying him 3 marks towards the regilding of the image of Lawrence the Martyr. Having stripped his robe, I had no choice but to let him have the wearing of my good leathern jerkin and hose, for, as he said, it was chilling to the blood and unseemly to the eye to stand frockless while I made my orisons. He had scarce got them on, and it was a sore labour, seeing that my inches will scarce match my girth. He had scarce got them on, I say, and I not yet at the end of the 2nd Psalm, when he bade me do honour to my new dress, and with that set off down the road as fast as his feet could carry him. For myself, I could no more run than if I had been sewn in a sack. So here I sit, and here I am likely to sit, before I set eyes upon my clothes again." "Nay, friend, take it not so sadly," said Alleyne, clapping the disconsolate one on the shoulder. "Canst change thy robe for a jerkin once more at the Abbey, unless perchance you have a friend near at hand." "That have I," he answered, "and close, but I care not to go nigh in this plight, for his wife hath a gibing tongue, and will spread the tale until I could not show my face in any market from Fording Bridge to Southampton. But if you, fair sir, out of your kind charity, would be pleased to go a matter of 2 bow shots out of your way, you would do me such a service as I could scarce repay." "With all my heart," said Alleyne readily. "Then take this pathway on the left, I pray thee, and then the deer track which passes on the right. You will then see under a great beech tree the hut of the charcoal burner. Give him my name, good sir, the name of Peter the Fuller of Lymington, and ask him for a change of raiment, that I may pursue my journey without delay. There are reasons why he would be loath to refuse me." Alleyne started off along the path indicated, and soon found the log hut where the burner dwelt. He was away faggot cutting in the forest, but his wife, a ruddy bustling dame, found the needful garments and tied them into a bundle. While she busied herself in finding and folding them, Alleyn Edricson stood by the open door, looking in at her with much interest and some distrust, for he had never been so nigh to a woman before. She had round red arms, a dress of some sober woollen stuff, and a brass brooch the size of a cheese cake stuck on the front of it. "Peter the Fuller," she kept repeating. "Marry, come up. If I were Peter the Fuller's wife I would teach him better than to give his clothes to the first knave who asks for them. But he was always a poor, fond, silly creature, was Peter, though we are beholden to him for helping to bury our 2nd son, Wat, who was apprenticed to him in Lymington in the year of the Black Death. But who are you, young sir?" "I am a clerk on my road from Beaulieu to Minstead." "Aye, indeed. Hast been brought up at the Abbey, then? I could read it from thy reddened cheek and downcast eye. Hast learned from the monks, I trow, to fear a woman as thou wouldst a lazar house. Out upon them, that they should dishonor their own mothers by such teaching. A pretty world it would be with all the women out of it. Heaven forfend that such a thing should come to pass," said Alleyne. "Amen and amen. But thou art a pretty lad, and the prettier for thy modest ways. It is easy to see from thy cheek that thou hast not spent thy days in the rain and the heat and the wind, as my poor Wat had been forced to do." "I have indeed seen little of life, good dame." "Wilt find nothing in it to pay for the loss of thy own freshness. Here are the clothes, and Peter can leave them when he next comes this way. Holy Virgin, see the dust upon thy doublet. It were easy to see that there is no woman to tend to thee. So, that's better. Now, buss me, boy." Alleyne stooped and kissed her, for the kiss was the common salutation of the age, and, as Erasmus long afterwards remarked, more used in England than in any other country. Yet it sent the blood to his temples again, and he wondered, as he turned away, what the Abbot Berghersh would have answered to so frank an invitation. He was still tingling from this new experience when he came out upon the high road and saw a sight which drove all other thoughts from his mind. Some way down from where he had left him, the unfortunate Peter was stamping and raving tenfold worse than before. Now, however, instead of the great white cloak, he had no clothes on at all, save a short woollen shirt and a pair of leather shoes. Far down the road a long legged figure was running, with a bundle under one arm and the other hand to his side, like a man who laughs until he is sore. "See him!" yelled Peter. "Look at him! You shall be my witness. He shall see Winchester jail for this. See where he goes with my cloak under his arm." "Who then?" cried Alleyne. "Who but that cursed brother John? He hath not left me clothes enough to make a galley bagger. The double thief has cozened me out of my gown." "Stay, though, friend, it was his gown," objected Alleyne. "It boots not. He hath them all, gown, jerkin, hosen, and all. Gramercy to him that he left me the shirt and the shoon. I doubt not that he will be back for them anon." "But how came this?" asked Alleyne, open eyed with astonishment. "Are those the clothes? For dear charity's sake give them to me." "Not the Pope himself shall have these from me, though he send the whole College of Cardinals to ask it. How came it? Why, you had scarcely gone ere this loathly John came running back again, and when I oped mouth to reproach him, he asked me whether it was indeed likely that a man of prayer would leave his own godly raiment in order to take a layman's jerkin. He had, he said, but gone for a while that I might be the freer for my devotions. On this I plucked off the gown, and he, with much show of haste, did begin to undo his points. But when I threw his frock down, he clipped it up and ran off all untrussed, leaving me in this sorry plight. He laughed so the while, like a great croaking frog, that I might have caught him had my breath not been as short as his legs were long." The young man listened to this tale of wrong with all the seriousness that he could maintain, but at the sight of the pursy, red faced man and the dignity with which he bore him, the laughter came so thick upon him that he had to lean up against a tree trunk. The fuller looked sadly and gravely at him, but finding that he still laughed, he bowed with much mock politeness and stalked onwards in his borrowed clothes. Alleyne watched him until he was small in the distance, and then, wiping the tears from his eyes, he set off briskly once more upon his journey. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 4. How the Bailiff of Southampton slew the two masterless men. The road along which he travelled was scarce as populous as most other roads in the kingdom, and far less so than those which lie between the larger towns. Yet from time to time Alleyne met other wayfarers, and more than once was overtaken by strings of pack mules and horsemen journeying in the same direction as himself. Once a begging friar came limping along in a brown habit, imploring in a most dolorous voice to give him a single groat to buy bread wherewith to save himself from impending death. Alleyne passed him swiftly by, for he had learned from the monks to have no love for the wandering friars, and besides, there was a great half gnawed mutton bone sticking out of his pouch to prove him a liar. Swiftly as he went, however, he could not escape the curse of the four blessed evangelists, which the mendicant howled behind him. So dreadful were his execrations that the frightened lad thrust his fingers into his ear holes, and ran until the fellow was but a brown smirch upon the yellow road. Further on, at the edge of the woodland, he came upon a chapman and his wife, who sat upon a fallen tree. He had put his pack down as a table, and the two of them were devouring a great pasty, and washing it down with some drink from a stone jar. The chapman broke a rough jest as he passed, and the woman called shrilly to Alleyne to come and join them, on which the man, turning suddenly from mirth to wrath, began to belabour her with his cudgel. Alleyne hastened on, lest he make more mischief, and his heart was heavy as lead within him. Look where he would, he seemed to see nothing but injustice and violence and the hardness of man to man. But even as he brooded sadly over it, and pined for the sweet peace of the abbey, he came on an open space dotted with holly bushes, where was the strangest sight he had yet chanced upon. Near to the pathway lay a long clump of greenery, and from behind this there stuck straight up into the air 4 human legs clad in parti coloured hosen, yellow and black. Strangest of all was, when a brisk tune suddenly struck up, the 4 legs began to kick and twitter in time to the music. Walking on tiptoe round the bushes, he stood in amazement to see 2 men bounding about on their heads while they played, the one on a viol and the other on a pipe, as merrily and as truly as though they were seated in a choir. Alleyne crossed himself as he gazed at this unnatural sight, and could scarce hold his ground when a steady face, when the 2 dancers, catching sight of him, came bouncing in his direction. A spear's length from him, they each threw a somersault into the air, and came down upon their feet with smirking faces and their hands over their hearts. "A guerdon, my knight of the staring eyes!" cried one. "A gift, my prince!" shouted the other. "Any trifle will serve. A purse of gold, or even a jewelled goblet." Alleyne thought of what he had read of demonic possession, the jumpings, the twitchings, the wild talk. It was in his mind to repeat over the exorcism proper to such attacks, but the 2 burst out a laughing at his scared face, and turning on to their heads once more, clapped their heels in derision. "Hast never seen tumblers before?" asked the elder, a black browed swarthy man, as brown and supple as a hazel twig. "Why shrink from us then, as though we were the spawn of the evil one? Why shrink, my honey bird? Why so afeard, my sweet cinnamon?" exclaimed the other, a loose jointed lanky youth with a dancing roguish eye. "Truly, sirs, it is a new sight to me," the clerk answered. "When I saw your 4 legs above the bush I could scarce credit my own eyes. Why is it that you do this thing?" "A dry question to answer," cried the younger, coming back on to his feet. "A most husky question, my fair bird." "But how? A flask, by all that is wonderful!" He shot out his hand as he spoke, and plucking Alleyne's bottle out of his scrip, he deftly knocked the neck off and poured the half of it down his throat. The rest he handed to his comrade, who drank the wine, and then, to the clerk's increasing amazement, made a show of swallowing the bottle, with such skill that Alleyne seemed to see it vanish down his throat. A moment later, however, he flung it over his head and caught it bottom downwards upon the calf of his left leg. "We thank you for the wine, kind sir," said he, "and for the ready courtesy wherewith you offered it. Touching your question, we may tell you that we are strollers and jugglers, who, having performed with much applause at Winchester Fair, are now on our way to the great Michaelmas market at Ringwood. As our art is a very fine and delicate one, however, we cannot let a day go by without exercising ourselves in it, to which end we choose some quiet and sheltered spot where we may break our journey. Here you find us, and we cannot wonder that you, who are new to tumbling, should be astounded, since many great barons, earls, marshals and knights, who have wandered as far as the Holy Land, are of one mind in saying that they have never seen a more noble or gracious performance. If you be pleased to sit upon that stump, we will now continue our exercise." Alleyne sat down willingly as directed, with 2 great bundles on either side of him, which contained the strollers' dresses, doublets of flame coloured silk, and girdles of leather spangled with brass and tin. The jugglers were on their heads once more, bounding about with rigid necks, playing the while in perfect time and tune. It chanced that out of one of the bundles there stuck the end of what the clerk saw to be a cittern. So, drawing it forth, he tuned it up and twanged a harmony to the merry lilt which the dancers played. On that they dropped their own instruments, and putting their hands to the ground, they hopped about fast and faster, ever shouting to him to play more briskly, until at last, for very weariness, all 3 had to stop. "Well played, sweet poppet!" cried the younger. "Hast a rare touch on the strings." "How knew you the tune?" asked the other. "I knew it not. I did but follow the notes I heard." Both opened their eyes at this, and stared at Alleyne with as much amazement as he had shown at them. "You have a fine trick of ear, then," said one. "We have long wished to meet such a man. Wilt join us and jog on to Ringwood? Thy duties shall be light, and thou shalt have twopence a day, and meat for supper every night." "With as much beer as you can put away," said the other, "and a flask of Gascon wine on Sabbaths." "Nay, it may not be. I have other work to do. I have tarried with you over long," quoth Alleyne, and resolutely set forth upon his journey once more. They ran behind him some little way, offering him first fourpence and then sixpence a day, but he only smiled and shook his head, until at last they fell away from him. Looking back, he saw that the smaller had mounted on the younger's shoulders, and that they stood so, some 10 feet high, waving their adieus to him. He waved back to them, and then hastened on, the lighter of heart for having fallen in with these strange men of pleasure. Alleyne had gone no great distance for all the many small passages that had befallen him. Yet to him, used as he was to a life of such quiet that the failure of a brewing or the altering of an anthem had seemed to be of the deepest import, the quick changing play of the lights and shadows of life was strangely startling and interesting. A gulf seemed to divide this brisk, uncertain existence from the old steady round of work and of prayer which he had left behind him. The few hours that had passed since he saw the Abbey tower stretched out in his memory until they outgrew whole months of the stagnant life of the cloister. As he walked and munched the soft bread from his scrip, it seemed strange to him to feel that it was still warm from the ovens of Beaulieu. When he passed Pennerley, where were 3 cottages and a barn, he reached the edge of the tree country, and found the great barren heath of Blackdown stretching in front of him, all pink with heather and bronzed with the fading ferns. On the left the woods were still thick, but the road edged away from them and wound over the open. The sun lay low in the west upon a purple cloud, whence it threw a mild chastening light over the wild moorland, and glittered on the fringe of forest, turning the withered leaves into flakes of dead gold, the brighter for the black depths behind them. To the seeing eye decay is as fair as growth, and death as life. The thought stole into Alleyne's heart as he looked upon the autumnal countryside and marvelled at its beauty. He had little time to dwell upon it, however, for there were still 6 good miles between him and the nearest inn. He sat down by the roadside to partake of his bread and cheese, and then, with a lighter scrip, he hastened upon his way. There appeared to be more wayfarers on the down than in the forest. First he passed 2 Dominicans in their long black dresses, who swept by him with downcast looks and pattering lips, without so much as a glance at him. Then there came a grey friar or minorite, with a good paunch upon him, walking slowly and looking about him with the air of a man who was at peace with himself and with all men. He stopped Alleyne to ask him whether it was not true that there was a hostel somewhere in these parts which was especially famous for the stewing of eels. The clerk having made answer that he had heard the eels of Sowley well spoken of, the friar smacked in his lips and hurried forward. Close at his heels came 3 labourers, walking abreast with spade and mattock over their shoulders. They sang some rude chorus right tunefully as they walked, but their English was so coarse and rough that to the ears of a cloister bred man it sounded like a foreign and barbarous tongue. One of them carried a young bittern which they had caught upon the moor, and they offered it to Alleyne for a silver groat. Very glad he was to get safely past them, for, with their bristling red beards and their fierce blue eyes, they were uneasy men to bargain with upon a lonely moor. Yet it is not always the burliest and the wildest who are the most to be dreaded. The workers looked hungrily at him, and then jogged onwards upon their way in slow lumbering Saxon style. A worse man to deal with was a wooden-legged cripple, who came hobbling down the path, so weak and so old to all appearance that a child need not stand in fear of him. Yet when Alleyne had passed him, of a sudden, out of pure devilment, he screamed out a curse at him, and sent a jagged flint stone hurtling past his ear. So horrid was the causeless rage of the crooked creature that the clerk came over a cold chill, and took to his heels until he was out of shot from stone or wood. It seemed to him that in this country of England there was no protection for a man save that which lay in the strength of his own arm and the speed of his own foot. In the cloisters he had heard vague talk of the law, the mighty law which was higher than prelate or baron, yet no sign could he see of it. What was the benefit of a law written upon fair parchment, he wondered, if there were no officers to enforce it? As it fell out, however, he had that very evening, ere the sun had set, a chance of seeing how stern was the grip of the English law when it did happen to seize the offender. A mile or so out upon the moor the road takes a very sudden dip into a hollow, with a peat coloured stream running swiftly down the very centre of it. To the right of this stood and stands to this day an ancient barrow or burying mound, covered deeply in a bristle of heather and bracken. Alleyne was plodding down the slope on one side when he saw an old dame coming towards him upon the other, limping with weariness and leaning heavily upon a stick. When she reached the edge of the stream she stood helpless, looking to right and to left for some ford. Where the path ran down a great stone had been fixed in the centre of the brook, but it was too far from the bank for her aged and uncertain feet. Twice she thrust forward at it, and twice she drew back, until at last, giving up in despair, she sat herself down by the brink and wrung her hands wearily. There she still sat when Alleyne reached the crossing. "Come, mother," quoth he, "it is not so very perilous a passage." "Alas, good youth," she answered, "I have a humour in the eyes, and though I can see that there is a stone there, I can by no means be sure as to where it lies." "That is easily amended," said he cheerily, and picking her lightly up, for she was much worn with time, he passed across with her. He could not but observe, however, that as he placed her down her knees seemed to fail her, and she could scarcely prop herself up with her staff. "You are weak, mother," said he. "Hast journeyed far, I wot." "From Wiltshire, friend," said she in a quavering voice. 3 days have I been on the road. I go to my son, who is one of the king's regarders at Brockenhurst. He has ever said that he would care for me in mine old age." "And rightly too, mother, since you cared for him in his youth. But when have you broken fast?" "At Lyndhurst. But alas, my money is at an end, and I could but get a dish of bran porridge from the nunnery. Yet I trust that I may be able to reach Brockenhurst tonight, where I may have all that heart can desire. For, oh, sir, but my son is a fine man, with a kindly heart of his own, and it is as good as food to me to think that he should have a doublet of Lincoln green to his back, and be the king's own paid man." "It is a long road yet to Brockenhurst," said Alleyne, "but here is such bread and cheese as I have left, and here, too, is a penny which may help you to supper. May God be with you." "May God be with you, young man," she cried. "May he make your heart as glad as you have made mine." She turned away, still mumbling blessings, and Alleyne saw her short figure and her long shadow stumbling slowly up the slope. He was moving away himself when his eyes lit upon a strange sight, and one which sent a tingling through his skin. Out of the tangled scrub on the old overgrown barrow 2 human faces were looking out at him. The sinking sun glimmered full upon them, showing up every line and feature. The one was an oldish man with a thin beard, a crooked nose, and a broad red smudge from a birthmark over his temple. The other was a negro, a thing rarely met in England at that day, and rarer still in the quiet Southland parts. Alleyne had read of such folk, but had never seen one before, and could scarce take his eyes from the fellow's broad pouting lip and shining teeth. Even as he gazed, however, the 2 came writhing out from among the heather, and came down towards him with such a guilty slinking carriage that the clerk felt that there was no good in them, and hastened onwards upon his way. He had not gained the crown of the slope when he heard a sudden scuffle behind him and a feeble voice bleating for help. Looking round, there was the old dame down upon the roadway, with her red wimple flying in the breeze, and the two rogues, black and white, stooped over her, wresting away from her the penny and other such poor trifles as were worth the taking. At the sight of her thin limbs struggling in weak resistance, such a glow of fierce anger passed over Alleyne as set his head in a whirl. Dropping his scrip, he bounded over the stream once more, and made for the two villains with his staff whirled over his shoulder and his grey eyes blazing with fury. The robbers, however, were not disposed to leave their victim until they had worked their wicked will upon her. The black man, with the woman's crimson scarf tied round his swarthy head, stood forward in the centre of the path, with a long, dull coloured knife in his hand, while the other, waving a ragged cudgel, cursed at Alleyne and dared him to come on. His blood was fairly aflame, however, and he needed no such challenge. Dashing at the black man, he smote at him with such a good will that the other let his knife tinkle in the roadway, and hopped howling to a safer distance. The second rogue, however, made of sterner stuff, rushed in upon the clerk, and clipped him round the waist with a grip like a bear, shouting the while to his comrade to come round and stab him in the back. At this the negro took heart of grace, and picking up his dagger again, he came stealing with prowling step and murderous eye, while the two swayed backwards and forwards, staggering this way and that. In the very midst of the scuffle, however, whilst Alleyne braced himself to feel the cold blade between his shoulders, there came a sudden scurry of hoofs, and the black man yelled with terror and ran for his life towards the heather. The man with the birthmark, too, struggled to break away, and Alleyne heard his teeth chatter and felt his limbs grow limp to his hand. At this sign of coming aid the clerk held on the tighter, and at last was able to pin his man down, and glanced behind him to see where all the noise was coming from. Down the slanting road there was riding a big burly man, clad in a tunic of purple velvet, and driving a great black horse as hard as it could gallop. He leaned well over its neck as he rode, and made a heaving with his shoulders at every bound, as though he were lifting the steed instead of it carrying him. In the rapid glance Alleyne saw that he had white doeskin gloves, a curling white feather in his flat velvet cap, and a broad gold embroidered baldric across his bosom. Behind him rode 6 others, 2 and 2, clad in sober brown jerkins, with the long yellow staves of their bows thrusting out from behind their right shoulders. Down the hill they thundered, over the brook, and up to the scene of the contest. "Here is one," said the leader, springing down from his reeking horse and seizing the white rogue by the edge of his jerkin. "This is one of them. I know him by that devil's touch upon his brow. Where are your cords, Peterkin? So, bind him hand and foot. His last hour has come. And you, young man, who may you be?" "I am a clerk, sir, travelling from Beaulieu." "A clerk?" cried the other. "Art from Oxford or from Cambridge? Hast thou a letter from the chancellor of thy college giving thee a permit to beg? Let me see thy letter." He had a stern, square face, with bushy side whiskers and a very questioning eye. "I am from Beaulieu Abbey, and I have no need to beg," said Alleyne, who was all of a tremble now that the ruffle was over. "The better for thee," the other answered. "Dost know who I am?" "No, sir, I do not." "I am the law," nodding his head solemnly. "I am the law of England, and the mouthpiece of his most gracious and royal majesty, Edward III." Alleyne louted low to the king's representative. "Truly you came in good time, honoured sir," said he. "A moment later and they would have slain me." "But there should be another one," cried the man in the purple coat. "There should be a black man, a shipman with St. Anthony's fire, and a black man who served him as cook. Those are the pair that we are in chase of." "The black man fled over to that side," said Alleyne, pointing towards the barrow. "He could not have gone far, Sir Bailiff," cried one of the archers, unslinging his bow. "He is in hiding somewhere, for he knew well, the black paynim as he is, that our horse's 4 legs could outstrip his 2. "Then we shall have him," said the other. "It shall never be said that whilst I am bailiff of Southampton that any waster, reaver, drawlatch or murderer came scatheless away from me and my posse. Leave that rogue lying. Now stretch out in a line, my merry ones, with arrow on string, and I shall show you such sport as only the king can give.
You on the left, Howett, and Thomas of Redbridge upon the right. So, beat high and low among the heather, and a pot of wine to the lucky marksman." As it chanced, however, the searchers had not far to seek. The negro had burrowed down into his hiding place upon the barrow, where he might have lain snug enough had it not been for the red gear upon his head. As he raised himself to look over the bracken at his enemies, the staring colour caught the eye of the bailiff, who broke into a long screeching whoop and spurred forward, sword in hand. Seeing himself discovered, the man rushed out of his hiding place and bounded at the top of his speed down the line of archers, keeping a good 100 paces to the front of them. The two who were on either side of Alleyn bent their bows as calmly as though they were shooting at the popinjay at the village fair. "7 yards windage, Hal," said one whose hair was streaked with grey. "5," replied the other, letting loose his string. Alleyne gave a gulp in his throat, for the yellow streak seemed to pass through the man, but he still ran forwards. "7, you jack fool," growled the first speaker, and his bow twanged like a harp string. The black man sprang high up into the air, and shot out both his arms and his legs, coming down all a sprawl among the heather. "Right under the blade bone," quoth the archer, sauntering forward for his arrow. "The old hand is the best, when all's said," quoth the bailiff of Southampton, as they made back for the roadway. "That means a quarter the best malmsey in Southampton this very night, Matthew Atwood. Art sure that he is dead?" "Dead as Pontius Pilate, worshipful sir." "It is well. Now as to the other knave. There are trees and to spare over yonder, but we have scarce leisure to make for them. Draw thy sword, Thomas of Redbridge, and hew me his head from his shoulders." "A boon, gracious sir, a boon!" cried the condemned man. "What then?" asked the bailiff. "I will confess to my crime. It was indeed I and the black cook, both from the ship La Rose de Gloire of Southampton, who did set upon the Flanders merchant and rob him of his spicery and his mercery, for which, as we well know, you hold a warrant against us." "There is little merit in this confession," quoth the bailiff sternly. "Thou hast done evil within my bailiwick, and must die." "But, sir," urged Alleyne, who was white to the lips at these bloody doings, "he hath not yet come to trial." "Young clerk," said the bailiff, "you speak of that which you know nothing. It is true that he hath not come to trial, but the trial hath come to him. He hath fled the law, and it is beyond its pale. Touch not that which is of no concern of thine. But what is this boon, rogue, which you would crave?" "I have in my shoe, most worshipful sir, a strip of wood which belonged once to the bark wherein the blessed Paul was dashed up against the island of Melita. I bought it for 2 rose nobles from a shipman who came from the Levant. The boon I crave is that you will place it in my hands and let me die still grasping it. In this manner not only shall my own eternal salvation be secured, but thine also, for I shall never cease to intercede for thee." At the command of the bailiff they plucked off the fellow's shoe, and there, sure enough, at the side of the instep, wrapped in a piece of fine sendal, lay a long dark splinter of wood. The archers doffed caps at the sight of it, and the bailiff crossed himself devoutly as he handed it to the robber. "If it should chance," he said, "that through the surpassing merits of the blessed Paul your sin stained soul should gain a way into paradise, I trust that you will not forget that intercession which you have promised. Bear in mind, too, that it is Hereward the bailiff for whom you pray, not Hereward the sheriff, who is my uncle's son. Now, Thomas, I pray you dispatch, for we have a long ride before us, and the sun has already set." Alleyne gazed upon the scene. The portly velvet clad official, the knot of hard faced archers with their hands to the bridles of their horses, the thief with his arms trussed back and his doublet turned down upon his shoulders. By the side of the track the old dame was standing, fastening her red wimple once more round her head. Even as he looked, one of the archers drew his sword with a sharp whir of steel and swept up to the lost man. The clerk hurried away in horror, but ere he had gone many paces he heard a sudden sullen thump, with a choking whistling sound at the end of it. A minute later the bailiff and 4 of his men rode past him on their journey back to Southampton,
the other two having been chosen as grave diggers. As they passed, Alleyne saw that one of the men was wiping his sword blade upon the mane of his horse. A deadly sickness came over him at the sight, and sitting down by the wayside he burst out weeping, with his nerves all a jangle. It was a terrible world, thought he, and it was hard to know which were the most to be dreaded, the knaves or the men of the law. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 5. How a strange company gathered at the Pied Merlin. The night had already fallen, and the moon was shining between the rifts of ragged drifting clouds before Alleyn Edricson, footsore and weary from the unwonted exercise, found himself in front of the Forest Inn which stood upon the outskirts of Lyndhurst. The building was long and low, standing back a little from the road, with two flambeaux blazing on either side of the door as a welcome to the traveller. From one window there thrust forth a long pole with a bunch of greenery tied to the end of it, a sign that liquor was to be sold within. As Alleyne walked up to it, he perceived that it was rudely fashioned out of beams of wood, with twinkling lights all over, where the glow from within shone through the chinks. The roof was poor and thatched, but in strange contrast to it there ran all along under the eaves a line of wooden shields, most gorgeously painted with chevron, bend, and saltire, and every heraldic device. By the door a horse stood tethered, the ruddy glow beating strongly upon his brown head and patient eyes, while his body stood back in the shadow. Alleyne stood still in the roadway for a few minutes, reflecting upon what he should do. It was, he knew, only a few miles further to Minstead, where his brother dwelt. On the other hand, he had never seen his brother since childhood, and the reports which had come to his ears concerning him were seldom to his advantage. By all accounts he was a hard and a bitter man. It might be an evil start to come to his door so late and claim the shelter of his roof. Better to sleep here at this inn, and then travel on to Minstead in the morning. If his brother would take him in, well and good. He would bide with him for a time, and do what he might to serve him. If, on the other hand, he should have hardened his heart against him, he could only go on his way and do the best he might by his skill as a craftsman and a scrivener. At the end of a year he would be free to return to the cloisters, for such had been his father's bequest. A monkish upbringing, 1 year in the world after the age of 20, and then a free selection one way or the other. It was a strange course which had been marked out for him. Such as it was, however, he had no choice but to follow it. And if he were to begin by making a friend of his brother, he had best wait until the morning before he knocked at his dwelling. The rude plank door was ajar, but as Alleyne approached it, there came from within such a gust of rough laughter and clatter of tongues that he stood irresolute upon the threshold. Summoning courage, however, and reflecting that it was a public dwelling in which he had as much right as any other man, he pushed it open and stepped into the common room. Though it was an autumn evening and somewhat warm, a huge fire of heaped billets of wood crackled and sparked in a broad open grate, some of the smoke escaping up a rude chimney, but the greater part rolling out into the room, so that the air was thick with it, and a man coming from without could scarce catch his breath. On this fire a great cauldron bubbled and simmered, giving forth a rich and promising smell. Seating round it were a dozen or so folk of all ages and conditions, who set up such a shout as Alleyne entered that he stood peering at them through the smoke, uncertain what this riotous greeting might portend. "A rouse! A rouse!" cried one rough-looking fellow in a tattered jerkin. "One more round of mead or ale, and the score to the last comer." "'Tis the law of the Pied Merlin," shouted another. "Ho there, Dame Eliza!
Here is fresh custom come to the house, and not a drain for the company."
"I will take your orders, gentles. I will assuredly take your orders," the landlady answered, bustling in with her hands full of leathern drinking cups. "What is it that ye drink, then? Beer for the lads of the forest, mead for the gleemen, strong waters for the tinker, and wine for the rest. It is an old custom of the house, young sir. It has been the use at the Pied Merlin this many a year back that the company should drink to the health of the last comer. Is it your pleasure to humour it?" "Why, good dame," said Alleyne, "I would not offend the customs of your house, but it is only sooth when I say that my purse is a thin one. As far as 2 pence will go, however, I shall be right glad to do my part."
"Plainly said and bravely spoken, my suckling friar," roared a deep voice, and a heavy hand fell upon Alleyne's shoulder. Looking up, he saw beside him his former cloister companion, the renegade monk, Hordle John. "By the thorn of Glastonbury, ill days are coming upon Beaulieu," said he. "Here they have got rid in one day of the only 2 men within their walls, for I have had mine eyes upon thee, youngster, and I know that for all thy baby face there is the making of a man in thee. Then there is the Abbot too. I am no friend of his, nor he of mine, but he has warm blood in his veins. He is the only man left among them. The others, what are they?"
"They are holy men," Alleyne answered gravely.
"Holy men? Holy cabbages? Holy bean pods? What do they do but live and suck in sustenance and grow fat? If that be holiness, I could show you hogs in this forest who are fit to head the calendar. Think you it was for such a life that this good arm was fixed upon my shoulder, or that head placed upon your neck? There is work in the world, man, and it is not by hiding behind stone walls that we shall do it."
"Why then did you join the brothers?" asked Alleyne.
"A fair enough question, but it is as fairly answered. I joined them because Margery Alspaye of Bordeaux married crooked Thomas of Ringwood, and left a certain John of Hordle in the cold, for that he was a ranting roving blade who was not to be trusted in wedlock. That was why, being fond and hot headed, I left the world, and that is why, having had time to take thought, I am right glad to find myself back in it once more. I'll betide the day that I ever took off my yeoman's jerkin to put on the white gown."
Whilst he was speaking, the landlady came in again, bearing a broad platter, upon which stood all the beakers and flagons, charged to the brim with the brown ale or the ruby wine. Behind her came a maid with a high pile of wooden plates and a great sheaf of spoons, one of which she handed round to each of the travellers. 2 of the company, who were dressed in the weather stained green doublet of foresters, lifted the big pot off the fire, and a third, with a huge pewter ladle, served out a portion of steaming collops to each guest. Alleyne bore his share and his ale mug away with him to a retired trestle in the corner, where he could sup in peace and watch the strange scene, which was so different to those silent and well ordered meals to which he was accustomed. The room was not unlike a stable. The low ceiling, smoke blackened and dingy, was pierced by several square trap doors with rough hewn ladders leading up to them. The walls of bare unpainted planks were studded here and there with great wooden pins placed at irregular intervals and heights, from which hung over tunics, wallets, whips, bridles and saddles. Over the fireplace were suspended 6 or 7 shields of wood, with coats of arms rudely daubed upon them, which showed by their varying degrees of smokiness and dirt that they had been placed there at different periods. There was no furniture save a single long dresser covered with coarse crockery, and a number of wooden benches and trestles, the legs of which sank deeply into the soft clay floor, while the only light, save that of the fire, was furnished by 3 torches stuck into sockets in the wall, which flickered and crackled, giving forth a strong resinous odour. All this was novel and strange to the cloister bred youth, but most interesting of all was the motley circle of guests who sat eating their collops round the blaze. They were a humble group of wayfarers, such as might have been found that night in any inn through the length and breadth of England, but to him they represented that vague world against which he had been so frequently and so earnestly warned. It did not seem to him, from what he could see of it, to be such a very wicked place after all. 3 or 4 of the men round the fire were evidently underkeepers and verderers from the forest, sunburned and bearded, with the quick restless eye and lithe movements of the deer among which they lived. Close to the corner of the chimney sat a middle aged gleeman, clad in a faded garb of Norwich cloth, the tunic of which was so outgrown that it did not fasten at the neck and at the waist. His face was swollen and coarse, and his watery protruding eyes spoke of a life which never wandered very far from the wine pot. A gilt harp, blotched with many stains and with 2 of its strings missing, was tucked under one of his arms, while with the other he scooped greedily at his platter. Next to him sat 2 other men of about the same age, one with a trimming of fur to his coat, which gave him a dignity which was evidently dearer to him than his comfort, for he still drew it round him in spite of the hot glare of the faggots. The other, clad in a dirty russet suit with a long sweeping doublet, had a cunning foxy face with keen twinkling eyes and a peaky beard. Next to him sat Honourable John, and beside him 3 other rough unkempt fellows with tangled beards and matted hair, free labourers from the adjoining farms, where small patches of freehold property had been suffered to remain scattered about in the heart of the royal domain. The company was completed by a peasant in a rude dress of undyed sheepskin, with the old fashioned galligaskins about his legs, and a gaily dressed young man with striped cloak jagged at the edges and parti-coloured hosen, who looked about him with high disdain upon his face, and held a blue smelling flask to his nose with one hand, while he brandished a busy spoon with the other. In the corner a very fat man was lying all asprawl upon a truss, snoring stertorously, and evidently in the last stage of drunkenness. "That is Wat the limner," quoth the landlady, sitting down beside Alleyne, and pointing with the ladle to the sleeping man. "That is he who paints the signs and the tokens. Alack and alas that ever I should have been fool enough to trust him. Now, young man, what manner of a bird would you suppose a pied merlin to be, that being the proper sign of my hostel?" "Why," said Alleyne, "a merlin is a bird of the same form as an eagle or a falcon. I can well remember that learned brother Bartholomew, who is deep in all the secrets of nature, pointed one out to me as we walked together near Vinny Ridge." "A falcon or an eagle, quotha? And pied, that is of 2 several colors. So any man would say, except this barrel of lies. He came to me, look you, saying that if I would furnish him with a gallon of ale, wherewith to strengthen himself as he worked, and also the pigments and a board, he would paint for me a noble pied merlin, which I might hang along with the blazonry over my door. I, poor simple fool, gave him the ale and all that he craved, leaving him alone too, because he said that a man must be left untroubled when he had great work to do. When I came back the gallon jar was empty, and he lay, as you see him, with the board in front of him, with this sorry device." She raised up a panel which was leaning against the wall, and showed a rude painting of a scraggy and angular fowl, with very long legs and a spotted body. "Was that," she asked, "like the bird thou hast seen?" Alleyne shook his head, smiling. "Nor any other bird that ever wagged a feather. It is most like a plucked pullet which has died of the spotted fever, and scarlet too. What would the gentle Sir Nicholas Boarhunt or Sir Bernard Brocas of Rochecourt say if they saw such a thing? Or perhaps even the king's own majesty himself, who often has ridden past this way, and who loves his falcons as he loves his sons. It would be the downfall of my house." "The matter is not past mending," said Alleyne. "I pray you, good dame, give me those 3 pigment pots and the brush, and I shall try whether I cannot better this painting." Dame Eliza looked doubtfully at him, as though fearing some other stratagem, but as he made no demand for ale, she finally brought the paints and watched him as he smeared on his background, talking the while about the folk round the fire. "The 4 forest lads must be jogging soon," she said. "They bide at Emery Down, a mile or more from here. Yeomen prickers they are, who tend the king's hunt. The gleeman is called Floyting Will. He comes from the north country, but for many years he hath gone the round of the forest from Southampton to Christchurch. He drinks much and pays little, but it would make your ribs crackle to hear him sing the jest of Hendy Tobias. Mayhap he will sing it when the ale has warmed him." "Who are those next to him?" asked Alleyne, much interested. "He of the fur mantle has a wise and reverend face." "He is a seller of pills and salves, very learned in humours and rheums and fluxes and all manner of ailments. He wears, as you perceive, the vernicle of sainted Luke, the first physician, upon his sleeve. May good Sir Thomas of Kent grant that it may be long before either I or mine need his help. He is here to night for herbergage, as are the others except the foresters. His neighbour is a tooth drawer. That bag at his girdle is full of the teeth which he drew at Winchester Fair. I warrant that there are more sound ones than sorry, for he is quick at his work and a trifle dim in the eye. The lusty man with the red beard I have not seen before. The four of his side are all workers, three of them in the service of the bailiff of Sir Baldwin Redvers, and the other, he with the sheepskin, is, as I hear, a villain from the Midlands who hath run from his master. His year and day are well nigh up, and he will be a free man." "And the other?" asked Alleyne in a whisper. "He is surely some very great man, for he looks as though he scorned those who were about him."
The landlady looked at him in a motherly way and shook her head. "You have had no great truck with the world," she said, "or you would have learned that it is the small men and not the great who hold their noses in the air. Look at those shields upon my wall and under my eaves. Each of them is the device of some noble lord or gallant knight who hath slept under my roof at one time or another. Yet milder men or easier men to please I have never seen, eating my bacon and drinking my wine with a merry face, and paying my score with some courteous word or jest which was dearer to me than my profit. Those are the true gentles. But your chapman or your bearward will swear that there is lime in the wine and water in the ale, and fling off at the last with a curse instead of a blessing. This youth is a scholar from Cambridge, where men are wont to be blown out by a little knowledge, and lose the use of their hands in learning the laws of the Romans. But I must away to lay down the beds. So may the saints keep you and prosper you in your undertaking." Thus left to himself, Alleyne drew his panel of wood where the light of one of the torches would strike full upon it, and worked away with all the pleasure of the trained craftsman, listening the while to the talk which went on round the fire. The peasant in the sheepskins, who had sat glum and silent all evening, had been so heated by his flagon of ale that he was talking loudly and angrily, with clenched hands and flashing eyes. "Sir Humphrey Tennant of Ashby may till his own fields for me," he cried. "The castle has thrown its shadow upon the cottage overlong. For 300 years my folk have swinked and sweated day in and day out to keep the wine on the lord's table and the harness on the lord's back. Let him take off his plates and delve himself, if delving must be done." "A proper spirit, my fair son," said one of the free labourers. "I would that all men were of thy way of thinking." "He would have sold me with his acres," the other cried in a voice which was hoarse with passion. "The man, the woman, and the litter. So ran the words of the dotard bailiff. Never a bullock on the farm was sold more lightly. Ha! He may wake some black night to find the flames licking around his ears, for fire is a good friend to the poor man, and I have seen a smoking heap of ashes where overnight there stood just another Castlewick as Ashby." "This is a lad of mettle," shouted another of the labourers. "He dares give tongue to what all men think. Are we not all from Adam's loins, all with flesh and blood, and with the same mouth that must needs have food and drink? Where all this difference then between the ermine cloak and the leathern tunic, if what they cover is the same?" "Aye, Jenkin," said another, "our foeman is under the stole and the vestment as much as under the helmet and plate of proof. We have as much to fear from the tonsure as from the hauberk. Strike at the noble and the priest shrieks. Strike at priest and the noble lays his hand upon glaive. They are twin thieves who live upon our labor." "It would take a cleverer man to live upon thy labor, Hugh," remarked one of the foresters, "seeing that half of thy time is spent swilling mead in the Pied Merlin. Better that than stealing the deer that thou art placed to guard, like some folk I know." "If you dare open that swine's mouth against me,"
shouted the woodman. "I'll crop your ears for you before the hangman has the doing of it, thou long jawed lack brain." "Nay, gentles, gentles," cried Dame Eliza, in a sing song, heedless voice, which showed that such bickerings were nightly things among her guests. "No brawling or brabbling, gentles. Take heed to the good name of the house." "Besides, if it comes to the cropping of ears, there are other folk who may say their say," quoth the third labourer. "We are all freemen, and I trow that a yeoman's cudgel is as good as a forester's knife. By St. Anselm, it would be an evil day if we had to bend to our master's servants as well to our masters." "No man is my master save the king," the woodman answered. "Who is there, save a false traitor, who would refuse to serve the English king?" "I know not about the English king," said the man Jenkin. "What sort of English king is it who cannot lay his tongue to a word of English? You mind last year, when he came down to Mulwood with his inner marshal and his outer marshal, his justiciar, his seneschal, and his 24 guardsmen. One noontide I was by Franklin Swinton's gate, when up he rides with a yeoman pricker at his heels. 'Ouvrez!' he cried, 'ouvrez!' or some such word, making signs for me to open the gate, and then 'Merci!' as though he were afraid of me. And you talk of an English king." "I do not marvel at it," cried the Cambridge scholar, speaking in the high, drawling voice which was common among his class. "It is not a tongue for men of sweet birth and delicate upbringing. It is a foul, snorting, snarling manner of speech. For myself, I swear by the learned Polycarp that I have most ease with Hebrew, and after that, perchance, with Arabian." "I will not hear a word said against old King Ned," cried Hordle John, in a voice like a bull. "What if he is fond of a bright eye and a saucy face? I know one of his subjects who could match him at that. If he cannot speak like an Englishman, I trow that he can fight like an Englishman, and he was hammering at the gates of Paris while ale house tropers were grutching and grumbling at home." This loud speech, coming from a man of so formidable an appearance, somewhat daunted the disloyal party, and they fell into a sullen silence, which enabled Alleyne to hear something of the talk which was going on in the further corner between the physician and the tooth drawer and the gleeman. "A raw rat," the man of drugs was saying. "That is what it is ever my use to order for the plague. A raw rat with its paunch cut open." "Might it not be broiled, most learned sir?" asked the tooth drawer. "A raw rat sounds a most sorry and cheerless dish." "Not to be eaten!" cried the physician in high disdain. "Why should any man eat such a thing?" "Why indeed?" asked the gleeman, taking a long drain at his tankard.
"It is to be placed on the sore or swelling. For the rat, mark you, being a foul living creature, hath a natural drawing or affinity for all things foul, so that the noxious humours pass from the man into the unclean beast."
"Would that cure the Black Death, master?"
asked Jenkin.
"Aye, truly it would, my fair son."
"Then I am right glad that there were none who knew of it. The Black Death is the best friend that ever common folk had in England."
"How that then?"
asked Hordle John. "Why, friend, it is easy to see that you have not worked with your hands, or you would not heed to ask. When half the folk in the country were dead, it was then that the other half could pick and choose who they would work for, and for what wage. That is why I say that the murrain was the best friend that the poor folk ever had."
"True, Jenkin,"
said another workman, "but it was not all good that is brought by it either. We well know that through it corn land has been turned into pasture, so that flocks of sheep with perchance a single shepherd wander now where once 100 men had work and wage." "There is no great harm in that," remarked the tooth drawer, "for the sheep give many folk their living. There is not only the herd, but the shearer and brander, and then the dresser, the curer, the dyer, the fuller, the webster, the merchant, and a score of others."
"If it come to that," said one of the foresters, "the tough meat of them will wear folks' teeth out, and there is a trade for the man who can draw them."
A general laugh followed this sally at the dentist's expense, in the midst of which the gleeman placed his battered harp upon his knee and began to pick out a melody upon the frayed strings.
"Elbow room for Floating Will," cried the woodman. "Twang us a merry lilt."
"Aye, aye, the lasses of Lancaster," one suggested. "Or St. Simeon and the Devil, or the jest of Hendy Tobias." To all these suggestions the jongleur made no response, but sat with his eye fixed abstractedly upon the ceiling, as one who calls words to his mind. Then, with a sudden sweep across the strings, he broke out into a song so gross and so foul that ere he had finished a verse the pure minded lad sprang to his feet with the blood tingling in his face.
"How can you sing such things?" he cried. "You, too, an old man who should be an example to others."
The wayfarers all gazed in the utmost astonishment at the interruption.
"By the holy Deacon of Ampole, our silent clerk has found his tongue," said one of the woodmen. "What is amiss with the song, then? How has it offended your babyship?" "A milder and better mannered song hath never been heard within these walls," cried another. "What sort of talk is this for a public inn?"
"Shall it be a litany, my good clerk?" shouted the third. "Or would a hymn be good enough to serve?" The jongleur had put down his harp in high dudgeon.
"Am I to be preached to by a child?" he cried, staring across at Alleyne with an inflamed and angry countenance. "Is a hairless infant to raise his tongue against me, when I have sung in every fair from Tweed to Trent, and have twice been named aloud by the High Court of the Minstrels at Beverley? I shall sing no more to night."
"Nay, but you will so," said one of the labourers. "Hi, Dame Eliza, bring a stoup of your best to Will to clear his throat. Go forward with thy song, and if our girl faced clerk does not love it, he can take to the road and go whence he came."
"Nay, but not too last," broke in Honourable John.
"There are two words in this matter. It may be that my little comrade has been over quick in reproof, he having gone early into the cloisters and seen little of the rough ways and words of the world. Yet there is truth in what he says, for, as you know well, the song was not of the cleanest. I shall stand by him, therefore, and he shall neither be put out on the road, nor shall his ears be offended indoors."
"Indeed, your high and mighty grace," sneered one of the yeomen.
"Have you in sooth so ordained?"
"By the Virgin," said the second, "I think that you may both chance to find yourselves upon the road before long."
"And so belaboured as to be scarce able to crawl along it," cried a third. "Nay, nay, I shall go, said Alleyne hurriedly, as Hordle John began to slowly roll up his sleeve and bare an arm like a leg of mutton. "I would not have you brawl about me."
"Hush, lad," he whispered. "I count them not a fly. They may find they have more tow on their distaff than they know how to spin. Stand thou clear and give me space."
Both the foresters and the labourers had risen from their bench, and Dame Eliza and the travelling doctor had flung themselves between the two parties with soft words and soothing gestures, when the door of the Pied Merlin was flung violently open, and the attention of the company was drawn from their own quarrel to the newcomer who had burst so unceremoniously upon them. Chapter 6 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 6. How Samkin Aylward wagered his feather bed. He was a middle-sized man of most massive and robust build, with an arching chest and extraordinary breadth of shoulder. His shaven face was as brown as a hazelnut, tanned and dried by the weather, with harsh, well marked features, which were not improved by a long white scar which stretched from the corner of his left nostril to the angle of the jaw. His eyes were bright and searching, with something of menace and of authority in their quick glitter, and his mouth was firm set and hard, as befitted one who was wont to set his face against danger. A straight sword by his side and a painted longbow jutting over his shoulder proclaimed his profession, while his starred brigandine of chain mail and his dinted steel cap showed that he was no holiday soldier, but one who was even now fresh from the wars. A white surcoat with the Lion of St. George in red upon the centre covered his broad breast, while a sprig of new plucked broom at the side of his headgear gave a touch of gaiety and grace to his grim, war worn equipment.
"Ha!" he cried, blinking like an owl in the sudden glare. "Good even to you, comrades. Hola, a woman, by my soul!"
And in an instant he had clipped Dame Eliza round the waist and was kissing her violently. His eye happening to wander upon the maid, however, he instantly abandoned the mistress and danced off after the other, who scurried in confusion up one of the ladders, and dropped the heavy trapdoor upon her pursuer. He then turned back and saluted the landlady once more with the utmost relish and satisfaction. "La petite is frightened," said he. "Ah, c'est l'amour, l'amour! Curse this trick of French, which will stick to my throat. I must wash it out with some good English ale. By my hilt, camarade, there's no drop of French blood in my body, and I'm a true English bowman, Samkin Aylward by name, and I tell you, mes amis, that it warms my very heart roots to set my feet on the dear old land once more. When I came off the galley at Hythe this very day, I down on my bones, and I kissed the good brown earth, as I kiss thee now, ma belle, for it was 8 long years since I had seen it. The very smell of it seemed life to me. But where are my 6 rascals? Hola there, en avant!" At the order, 6 men dressed as common drudges marched solemnly into the room, each bearing a huge bundle upon his head. They formed in military line, while the soldier stood in front of them with stern eyes, checking off their several packages. "Number 1, a French feather bed with 2 counterpanes of white sendal," said he. "Here, worthy sir," answered the first of the bearers, laying a great package down in the corner. "Number 2, 7 ells of red turkey cloth and 9 ells of cloth of gold. Put it down by the other. Good dame, I prithee give each of these men a bottrine of wine or a jack of ale. 3, a full piece of white Genoan velvet with 12 ells of purple silk." "Thou rascal, there is dirt on the hem. Thou hast brushed it against some wall, coquin." "Not I, most worthy sir," cried the carrier, shrinking away from the fierce eyes of the bowman. "I say yes, dog. By the 3 kings, I have seen a man gasp out his last breath for less. Had you gone through the pain and unease that I have done to earn these things, you would be at more care. I swear by my 10 finger bones that there is not one of them that hath not cost its weight in French blood. 4, an incense boat, a ewer of silver, a gold buckle, and a cope worked in pearls. I found them, camarade, at the church of Saint Denis in the harrying of Narbonne, and I took them away with me lest they fall into the hands of the wicked. 5, a cloak of fur turned up with minever, a gold goblet with stand and cover, and a box of rose-colored sugar. See that you lay them together. 6, a box of moneys, 3 pounds of Limousine gold work, a pair of boots, silver tagged, and lastly a store of naping linen. So the tally is complete. Here is a groat apiece, and you may go." "Go whither, worthy sir?" asked one of the carriers. "Whither? To the devil, if you will. What is it to me? Now, ma belle, to supper. A pair of cold capons, a mortress of brawn, or what you will, with a flask or 2 of the right Gascony. I have crowns in my pouch, my sweet, and I mean to spend them. Bring in the wine while the food is dressing. Buvons, mes brave lads. You shall each empty a stoup with me." Here was an offer which the company in an English inn at that or any other date are slow to refuse. The flagons were regathered and came back with the white foam dripping over their edges. 2 of the woodmen and 3 of the labourers drank their portions off hurriedly and trooped off together, for their homes were distant and the hour late. The others, however, drew closer, leaving the place of honour to the right of the gleeman, to the free-handed newcomer. He had thrown off his steel cap, his brigandine, and had placed them, with his sword, his quiver, and his painted longbow, on the top of his varied heap of plunder in the corner. Now, with his thick and somewhat bowed legs stretched in front of the blaze, his green jerkin thrown open, and a great quart pot held in his corded fist, he looked the picture of comfort and of good fellowship. His hard set face had softened, and the thick crop of crisp brown curls, which had been hidden by his helmet, grew low upon his massive neck. He might have been 40 years of age, though hard toil and harder pleasure had left their grim marks upon his features. Alleyne had ceased painting his pied Merlin, and sat, brush in hand, staring with open eyes at a type of man so strange and so unlike any whom he had met. Men had been good or had been bad in his catalogue, but here was a man who was fierce one instant and gentle the next, with a curse on his lips and a smile in his eye. What was to be made of such a man as that? It chanced that the soldier looked up and saw the questioning glance which the young clerk threw upon him. He raised his flagon and drank to him with a merry flash of his white teeth. "À toi, mon garçon!" he cried. "Hast surely never seen a man at arms that thou shouldst stare so?" "I never have," said Alleyne frankly, "though I have oft heard talk of their deeds." "By my hilt!" cried the other, "if you were to cross the narrow sea you would find them as thick as bees at a tee hole. Couldst not shoot a bolt down any street of Bordeaux, I warrant, but you would pink archer, squire, or knight. There are more breastplates than gabardines to be seen, I promise you." "And where got you all these pretty things?" asked Hordle John, pointing at the heap in the corner.
"Where there is much more waiting for any brave lad to pick it up, where a good man can always earn a good wage, and where he need look upon no man as his paymaster, but just reach his hand out and help himself. Aye, it is a goodly and a proper life. And here I drink to mine old comrades, and the saints be with them. Arouse all together, mes enfants, under pain of my displeasure. To Sir Claude Latour and the White Company."
"Sir Claude Latour and the White Company!" shouted the travellers, draining off their goblets.
"Well quaffed, mes braves. It is for me to fill your cups again, since you have drained them to my dear lads of the white jerkin. Hola, mon ange, bring wine and ale. How runs the old stave? We'll drink all together to the grey goose feather and the land where the grey goose flew." He roared out the catch in a harsh, unmusical voice, and ended with a shout of laughter. "I trust that I am a better bowman than a minstrel," said he. "Methinks I have some remembrance of the lilt," remarked the gleeman, running his fingers over the strings. "Hoping that it will give thee no offence, most holy sir," with a vicious snap at Alleyne, "and with the kind permit of the company I will even venture upon it." Many a time in the after days Alleyn Edricson seemed to see the scene, for all that so many which were stranger and more stirring were soon to crowd upon him. The fat red faced gleeman, the listening group, the archer with upraised finger beating in time to the music, and the huge sprawling figure of Hordle John, all thrown into red light and black shadow by the flickering fire in the centre. Memory was to come often lovingly back to it. At the time he was lost in admiration at the deft way in which the jongleur disguised the loss of his two missing strings, and the lusty, hearty fashion in which he trolled out his little ballad of the outland bowman, which ran in some such fashion as this: "What of the bow? The bow was made in England, of true wood, of yew wood, the wood of English bows. So men who are free love the old yew tree, and the land where the yew tree grows. What of the cord? The cord was made in England, a rough cord, a tough cord, a cord that bowmen love. So we'll drain our jacks to the English flax and the land where the hemp was wove. What of the shaft? The shaft was cut in England, a long shaft, a strong shaft, barbed and trim and true. So we'll drink all together to the grey goose feather and the land where the grey goose flew. What of the men? The men were bred in England, the bowmen, the yeomen, the lads of dale and fell. Here's to you and to you, to the hearts that are true, and the land where the true hearts dwell." "Well sung, by my hilt!" shouted the archer in high delight. "Many a night have I heard that song, both in the old war time and after, in the days of the White Company, when Black Simon of Norwich would lead the stave, and 400 of the best bowmen that ever drew string would come roaring in upon the chorus. I have seen old John Hawkwood, the same who has led half the company into Italy, stand laughing in his beard as he heard it, until his plates rattled again. But to get the full smack of it, ye must yourselves be English bowmen, and be far off upon outland soil." Whilst the song had been singing, Dame Eliza and the maid had placed a board across two trestles, and had laid upon it the knife, the spoon, the salt, the trencher of bread, and finally the smoking dish which held the savory supper.
The archer settled himself to it like one who had known what it was to find good food scarce, but his tongue still went as merrily as his teeth.
"It passes me," he cried, "how all you lusty fellows can bide scratching your backs at home when there are such doings over the seas. Look at me. What have I to do? It is but the eye to the cord to the shaft, and the shaft to the mark. There is the whole song of it. It is but what you do yourselves for pleasure upon a Sunday evening at the parish village butts."
"And the wage?" asked the laborer.
"You see what the wage brings," he answered. "I eat of the best, and I drink deep. I treat my friend, and I ask no friend to treat me. I clap a silk gown on my girl's back. Never a knight's lady shall be better betrimmed and betrinketed. How of all that, mon garçon? And how of the heap of trifles that you can see for yourselves in yonder corner? They are from the South French, every one, upon whom I have been making war. By my hilt, camarade, I think that I may let my plunder speak for itself."
"It seems indeed to be a goodly service," said the tooth drawer.
"Tete bleu, yes indeed. Then there is the chance of a ransom. Why, look you, in the affair at Brignais some 4 years back, when the Company slew James of Bourbon and put his army to the sword, there was scarce a man of ours who had not count, baron, or knight. Peter Carsdale, who was but a common country lout newly brought over, with the English fleas still hopping under his doublet, laid his great hands upon Sieur Amaury de Chatonville, who owns half Picardy, and had 5,000 crowns out of him, with his horse and harness. 'Tis true that a French wench took it all off Peter as quick as the Frenchman paid it, but what then? By the twang of string, it would be a bad thing if money was not made to be spent, and how better than on a woman, eh, ma belle?"
"It would indeed be a bad thing if we had not our brave archers to bring wealth and kindly customs into the country," quoth Dame Eliza, on whom the soldier's free and open ways had made a deep impression.
"A toi, ma chérie," said he, with his hand over his heart. "Hola, there is la petite peeping from behind the door. A toi aussi, ma petite. Mon Dieu, but the lass has a good color."
"There is one thing, fair sir," said the Cambridge student in his piping voice, "which I would fain that you would make more clear. As I understand it, there was peace made at the town of Bretigny some 6 years back between our most gracious monarch and the King of the French. This being so, it seems most passing strange that you should talk so loudly of war and of companies where there is no quarrel between the French and us."
"Meaning that I lie,"
said the archer, laying down his knife. "May heaven forfend!" cried the student hastily. "Magna est veritas sed rara, which means in the Latin tongue that archers are all honourable men. I come to you seeking knowledge, for it is my trade to learn."
"I fear that you are apprenticed to that trade," quoth the soldier, "for there is no child over the water but could answer what you ask. Know then that though there may be peace between our own provinces and the French, yet within the marches of France there is always war, for the country is much divided against itself, and it is furthermore harried by bands of flayers, skinners, Brabançons, Tardvenus, and the rest of them. When every man's grip is on his neighbor's throat, and every 5-sou piece of a baron is marching with tuck of drum to fight whom he will, it would be a strange thing if 500 brave English boys could not pick up a living. Now that Sir John Hawkwood hath gone with the East Anglian lads and the Nottingham woodmen into the service of the Marquis of Montferrat to fight against the Lord of Milan, there are but 10 score of us left. Yet I trust that I may be able to bring some back with me to fill the ranks of the White Company. By the tooth of Peter, it would be a bad thing if I could not muster many a Hampshire man who would be ready to strike in under the red flag of St. George, and the more so if Sir Nigel Loring of Christchurch should don hauberk once more and take the lead of us."
"Ah, you would indeed be in luck then," quoth a woodman, "for it is said that, setting aside the prince, and mayhap good old Sir John Chandos, there was not in the whole army a man of such tried courage."
"It is sooth, every word of it," the archer answered. "I have seen him with these 2 eyes in a stricken field, and never did man carry himself better. Mon Dieu, yes, you would not credit it to look at him, or to hearken to his soft voice, but from the sailing from Orwell down to the foray to Paris, and that is clear 20 years, there was not a skirmish, onfall, sally, bushment, escalado, or battle, but Sir Nigel was in the heart of it. I go now to Christchurch with a letter to him from Sir Claude Latour to ask him if he will take the place of Sir John Hawkwood, and there is more chance that he will if I bring one or two likely men at my heels. What say you, woodman? Wilt leave the bucks to loose a shaft at a nobler mark?" The forester shook his head. "I have wife and child at Emery Down," quoth he. "I will not leave them for such a venture." "You then, young sir?" asked the archer. "Nay, I am a man of peace," said Alleyn Edricson. "Besides, I have other work to do." "Peste!" growled the soldier, striking his flagon on the board until the dishes danced again. "What in the name of the devil hath come over the folk? Why sit ye all moping by the fireside like crows round a dead horse, when there is man's work to be done within a few short leagues of ye? Out upon you all, as a set of laggards and hangbacks! By my hilt, I believe that the men of England are all in France already, and that what is left behind are in sooth the women dressed up in their paltocks and hosen." "Archer," quoth Hordle John, "you have lied more than once and more than twice, for which, and also because I see much in you to dislike, I am sorely tempted to lay you upon your back." "By my hilt, then, I have found a man at last," shouted the bowman, "and 'fore God you are a better man than I take you for, if you can lay me on my back, mon garçon. I have won the ram more times than there are toes to my feet, and for 7 long years I have found no man in the company who could make my jerkin dusty." "We have had enough bobbants and boasting," said Hordle John, rising and throwing off his doublet. "I will show you that there are better men left in England than ever went thieving to France." "Pasque Dieu!" cried the archer, loosing his jerkin and eyeing his foeman over with the keen glance of one who is a judge of manhood. "I have only once before seen such a body of a man. By your leave, my red headed friend, I should be right sorry to exchange buffets with you, and I will allow that there is no man in the company who would pull against you on a rope. So let that be salve to your pride. On the other hand, I should judge that you have led a life of ease for some months back, and that my muscle is harder than your own. I am ready to wager upon myself against you, if you are not afeared." "Afeared, thou lurden!" growled Big John. "I never saw the face yet of a man that I was afeared of. Come out, and we shall see who is the better man." "But the wager?" "I have naught to wager. Come out for the love and the lust of the thing." "Naught to wager!" cried the soldier. "Why, you have that which I covet above all things. It is that big body of thine that I am after. See now, mon garçon, I have a French feather bed there, which I have been in pains to keep these years back. I had it at the sacking of Issodun, but the king himself hath not such a bed. If you throw me, it is thine, but if I throw you, then you are under a vow to take bow and bill and hie with me to France, there to serve in the White Company, as long as we be enrolled." "A fair wager!" cried all the travellers, moving back their benches and trestles so as to give fair field for the wrestlers. "Then you may bid farewell to your bed, soldier," said Hordle John. "Nay, I shall keep the bed, and I shall have you to France in spite of your teeth, and you shall live to thank me for it. How shall it be then, mon enfant? Collar and elbow, or close lock, or catch how you can?" "To the devil with your tricks," said John, opening and shutting his great red hands. "Stand forth and let me clip thee." "Shalt clip me as best you can, then," quoth the archer, moving out into the open space and keeping a most wary eye upon his opponent. He had thrown off his green jerkin, and his chest was covered only by a pink silk jupon or undershirt, cut low in the neck and sleeveless. Hordle John was stripped from his waist upwards, and his huge body, with his great muscles swelling out like the gnarled roots of an oak, towered high above the soldier. The other, however, though near a foot shorter, was a man of great strength, and there was a gloss upon his white skin which was wanting in the heavier limbs of the renegade monk. He was quick on his feet too, and skilled at the game, so that it was clear from the poise of head and shine of eye that he counted the chances to be in his favor. It would have been hard that night, through the whole length of England, to set up a finer pair in face of each other. Big John stood waiting in the centre with a sullen, menacing eye, and his red hair in a bristle, while the archer paced lightly and swiftly to the right and the left,
with crooked knee and hands advanced. Then with a sudden dash, so swift and fierce that the eye could scarce follow it, he flew in upon his man and locked his leg round him. It was a grip that, between men of equal strength, would mean a fall, but Hordle John tore him off from him as he might a rat, and hurled him across the room, so that his head cracked up against the wooden wall. "Ma foi!" cried the bowman, passing his fingers through his curls. "You were not far from the feather bed then, mon gar. A little more, and this good hostel would have a new window." Nothing daunted, he approached his man once more, but this time with more caution than before. With a quick feint he threw the other off his guard, and then, bounding upon him, threw his legs round his waist and his arms round his bull neck, in the hope of bearing him to the ground with the sudden shock. With a bellow of rage, Hordle John squeezed him limp in his huge arms, and then, picking him up, cast him down upon the floor with a force which might well have splintered a bone or two, had not the archer, with the most perfect coolness, clung to the other's forearms to break his fall. As it was, he dropped upon his feet and kept his balance, though it sent a jar through his frame which set every joint a creaking. He bounded back from his perilous foeman, but the other, heated by the bout, rushed madly after him, and so gave the practised wrestler the very vantage for which he had planned. As big John flung himself upon him, the archer ducked under the great red hands that clutched for him, and, catching his man round the thighs, hurled him over his shoulder, helped as much by his own mad rush as by the trained strength of the heave. To Alleyne's eye it was as if John had taken unto himself wings and flown. As he hurtled through the air with giant limbs revolving, the lad's heart was in his mouth, for surely no man ever yet had such a fall and came scatheless out of it. In truth, hardy as the man was, his neck had been assuredly broken had he not pitched head first on to the very midriff of the drunken artist, who was slumbering so peacefully in the corner, all unaware of these stirring doings. The luckless limner, thus suddenly brought out from his dreams, sat up with a piercing yell, while Hordle John bounded back into the circle almost as rapidly as he had left it. "One more fall, by all the saints!" he cried, throwing out his arms. "Not I," quoth the archer, pulling on his clothes. "I have come well out of the business. I would sooner wrestle with the great bear of Navarre." "It was a trick," cried John. "Aye, was it? By my 10 finger bones, it's a trick that will add a proper man to the ranks of the company." "Oh, for that," said the other, "I count it not a fly, for I had promised myself a good hour ago that I should go with thee, since the life seems to be a goodly and proper one. Yet I would fain have the feather bed." "I doubt it not, mon ami," quoth the archer, going back to his tankard. "But here's to thee, lad, and may we be good comrades to each other. But hola! What is it that ails our friend of the wrathful face?" The unfortunate limner had been sitting up, rubbing himself ruefully, and staring about with a vacant gaze, which showed that he neither knew where he was nor what had occurred to him. Suddenly, however, a flash of intelligence had come over his sodden features, and he rose and staggered for the door. "Where the ale?" he said in a hoarse whisper, shaking a warning finger to the company. "Oh, Holy Virgin, where the ale?" And slapping his hand to his injury, he flitted off into the darkness amid a shout of laughter, in which the vanquished joined as merrily as the victor. The remaining forester and the 2 laborers were also ready for the road, and the rest of the company turned to the blankets which Dame Eliza and the maid had laid out for them upon the floor. Alleyne, weary with the unwonted excitements of the day, was soon in a deep slumber, broken only by fleeting visions of twittering legs, cursing beggars, black robbers, and the many strange folk whom he had met at the Pied Merlin. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 7. How the 3 comrades journeyed through the woodlands. At early dawn the country inn was all alive, for it was rare indeed that an hour of daylight would be wasted at a time when lighting was so scarce and dear. Indeed, early as it was when Dame Eliza began to stir, it seemed that others could be earlier still, for the door was ajar, and the learned student of Cambridge had taken himself off with a mind which was too intent upon the high things of antiquity to stoop to consider the fourpence which he owed for bed and board. It was the shrill outcry of the landlady when she found her loss, and the clucking of the hens which had streamed in through the open door, that first broke in upon the slumbers of the tired wayfarers. Once afoot, it was not long before the company began to disperse. A sleek mule with red trappings was brought round from some neighboring shed for the physician, and he ambled away with much dignity upon his road to Southampton. The tooth drawer and the gleeman called for a cup of small ale apiece, and started off together for Ringwood Fair, the old jongleur looking very yellow in the eye and swollen in the face after his overnight potations. The archer, however, who had drunk more than any man in the room, was as merry as a grig, and having kissed the matron and chased the maid up the ladder once more, he went out to the brook and came back with the water dripping from his face and hair. "Hola, my man of peace!" he cried to Alleyne. "Whither are you bent this morning?" "To Minstead," quoth he. "My brother Simon Edricson is sockman there, and I go to bide with him for a while. I prithee let me have my score, good dame." "Score indeed!" cried she, standing with upraised hands in front of the panel on which Alleyne had worked the night before. "Say rather what it is that I owe thee, good youth. Aye, this is indeed a pied merlin, with a leveret under its claws, as I am a living woman. By the rood of Waltham, but thy touch is deft and dainty. And see the red eye of it!" cried the maid. "Aye, and the open beak." "And the ruffled wing," added Hordle John. "By my hilt!" cried the archer, "it is indeed the very bird itself." The young clerk flushed with pleasure at this chorus of praise, rude and indiscriminate indeed, and yet so much heartier and less grudging than any which he had ever heard from the critical brother Jerome or the short spoken abbot. There was, it would seem, great kindness as well as great wickedness in this world of which he had heard so little that was good. His hostess would hear nothing of his paying either for bed or for board, while the archer and Hordle John placed a hand upon either shoulder and led him off to the board, where some smoking fish, a dish of spinach, and a jug of milk were laid out for their breakfast. "I should not be surprised to learn, mon camarade," said the soldier, as he heaped a slice of fish upon Alleyne's trencher of bread, "that you could read written things, since you are so ready with your brushes and pigments." "It would be a shame to the good brothers of Beaulieu if I could not," he answered, "seeing that I have been their clerk this 10 years back." The bowman looked at him with great respect. "Think of that!" said he. "And you with not a hair to your face, and a skin like a girl. I can shoot 350 paces with my little popper there, and 420 with the great war bow, yet I can make nothing of this, nor read my own name if you were to set Sam Aylward up against me. In the whole company there was only one man who could read, and he fell down a well at the taking of Ventadour, which proves that the thing is not suited to a soldier, though most needful to a clerk." "I can make some show at it," said big John, "though I was scarce long enough among the monks to catch the whole trick of it." "Here, then, is something to try upon," quoth the archer, pulling a square of parchment from the inside of his tunic. It was tied securely with a broad band of purple silk, and firmly sealed at either end with a large red seal. John pored long and earnestly over the inscription upon the back, with his brows bent as one who bears up against great mental strain. "Not having read much of late," he said, "I am loath to say too much about what this may be. Some may say one thing and some another, just as one bowman loves the yew, and a second will not shoot save with the ash. To me, by the length and look of it, I should judge this to be a verse from one of the Psalms." The bowman shook his head. "It is scarce likely," he said, "that Sir Claude Latour should send me all the way across seas with naught more weighty than a psalm verse. You have clean overshot the butts this time, mon camarade. Give it to the little one. I will wager my feather bed that he makes more sense of it." "Why, it is written in the French tongue," said Alleyne, "and in a right clerkly hand. This is how it runs.
à le mou puissant et mou honourable chevalier Sir Nigel Loring de Christchurch, de son très fidèle ami Sir Claude Latour, capitaine de la Compagnie Blanche, châtelain de Biscar, grand seigneur de Montchâteau, vavasseur de le renom Gaston, comte de Foix, tenant les droits de la haute justice de la milieu et de la basse, which signifies in our speech, to the very powerful and very honourable knight Sir Nigel Loring of Christchurch, from his very faithful friend Sir Claude Latour, captain of the White Company, chatelain of Biscar, grand lord of Montchâteau, and vassal to the renowned Gaston, comte de Foix, who holds the rights of the high justice, the middle, and the low." "Look at that now!" cried the bowman in triumph. "That is just what he would have said." "I can see now that it is even so," said John, examining the parchment again, "though I scarce understand this high, middle, and low." "By my hilt! you would understand it if you were Jacques Bonhomme. The low justice means that you may fleece him, and the middle that you may torture him, and the high that you may slay him. That is about the truth of it. But this is the letter which I am to take, and since the platter is clean, it is time that we trussed up and were afoot. You come with me, mon gros Jean. And as to you, little one, where did you say you journeyed?" "To Minstead." "Ah, yes, I know this forest country well, though I was born myself in the hundred of Easebourne, in the rape of Chichester, hard by the village of Midhurst. Yet I have not a word to say against the Hampton men, for there are no better comrades or truer archers in the whole company than some who learned to loose the string in these very parts. We shall travel round with you to Minstead, lad, seeing that it is little out of our way." "I am ready," said Alleyne, right pleased at the thought of such company upon the road. "So am not I. I must store my plunder at this inn, since the hostess is an honest woman. Hola, ma cherie, I wish to leave you my gold work, my velvet, my silk, my feather bed, my incense boat, my ewer, my naping linen, all the rest of it. I take only the money in a linen bag, and the box of rose colored sugar, which is a gift from my captain to the Lady Loring. Wilt guard my treasure for me?" "I shall put it in the safest loft, good archer. Come when you may, you shall find it ready for you." "Now there is a true friend," cried the bowman, taking her hand. "There is a bonne amie. English land and English women, say I, and French wine and French plunder. I shall be back anon, mon ange. I am a lonely man, my sweeting, and I must settle some day when the wars are over and done. Mayhap you and I Ah, méchant, méchant! There is la petite peeping from behind the door. Now, John, the sun is over the trees. You must be brisker than this when the bugleman blows bows and bills." "I have been waiting this time back," said Hordle John gruffly. "Then we must be off. Adieu, ma vie. The 2 livres shall settle the score and buy some ribbons against the next kermesse. And do not forget Sam Aylward, for his heart shall ever be thine alone, and thine, ma petite. So marchons, and may St. Julian grant us good quarters elsewhere." The sun had risen over Ashurst and Denny woods, and was shining brightly, though the eastern wind had a sharp flavour to it, and the leaves were still flickering thickly from the trees. In the high street of Lyndhurst the wayfarers had to pick their way, for the little town was crowded with the guardsmen, grooms, and yeomen prickers who were attached to the king's hunt. The king himself was staying at Castle Malwood, but several of his suite had been compelled to seek such quarters as they might find in the wooden or wattle and daub cottages of the village. Here and there a small escutcheon, peeping from a glassless window, marked the night's lodging of a knight or baron. These coats of arms could be read where a scroll would be meaningless, and the bowman, like most men of his age, was well versed in the common symbols of heraldry. "There is the Saracen's head of Sir Bernard Brocas," quoth he. "I saw him last at the ruffle at Poitiers some 10 years back, where he bore himself like a man. He is the master of the king's horse, and can sing a right jovial stave, though in that he cannot come nigh to Sir John Chandos, who is first at the board or in the saddle. 3 martlets on a field azure. That must be one of the Luttrells. By the crescent upon it, it should be the second son of old Sir Hugh, who had a bolt through his ankle at the intaking of Romorantin, he having rushed into the fray ere his squire had time to clasp his soleret to his greave. There too is the hackle, which is the old device of the de Brays. I have served under Sir Thomas de Bray, who was as jolly as a pie, and a lusty swordsman until he got too fat for his harness." So the archer gossiped as the three wayfarers threaded their way among the stamping horses, the busy grooms, and the knots of pages and squires, who disputed over the merits of their masters' horses and deer hounds. As they passed the old church, which stood upon a mound at the left hand side of the village street, the door was flung open, and a stream of worshippers wound down the sloping path, coming from the morning mass, all chattering like a cloud of jays. Alleyne bent knee and doffed hat at the sight of the open door, but ere he had finished an ave his comrades were out of sight round the curve in the path, and he had to run to overtake them. "What!" he said, "not one word of prayer before God's own open house? How can he hope for his blessing upon the day?" "My friend," said Hordle John, "I have prayed so much during the last 2 months, not only during the day, but at matins, lauds, and the like, when I could scarce keep my head upon my shoulders for nodding, that I feel I have somewhat over prayed myself." "How can a man have too much religion?" cried Alleyne earnestly. "It is the one thing that availeth. A man is but a beast as he lives from day to day, eating and drinking, breathing and sleeping. It is only when he raises himself and concerns himself with the immortal spirit within him that he becomes in the very truth a man. Bethink ye how sad a thing it would be that the blood of the Redeemer should be spilled to no purpose." "Bless the lad, if he doth not blush like any girl and yet preach like the whole college of cardinals," cried the archer. "In truth, I blush that any one so weak and so unworthy as I should try to teach another that which he finds it so passing hard to follow himself."
"Prettily said, mon garçon. Touching that same slaying of the Redeemer, it was a bad business. A good padre in France read to us from a scroll the whole truth of the matter. The soldiers came upon him in the garden. In truth, these apostles of his may have been holy men, but they were of no great account as men at arms. There was one, indeed, Sir Peter, who smote out like a true man, but unless he is belied, he did but clip a varlet's ear, which is no very knightly deed. By these 10 finger bones, had I been there with Black Simon of Norwich and but 100 picked men of the company, we had held them in play. Could we do no more, we at least filled the false knight Sir Judas so full of English arrows that he would curse the day that ever he came on such an errand."
The young clerk smiled at his companion's earnestness. Had he wished help, he said, he could have summoned legions of archangels from heaven, so what need had he of your poor bow and arrow? Besides, bethink you of his own words, that those who live by the sword shall perish by the sword.
"And how could man die better?" asked the archer. "If I had my wish, it would be to fall so, not, mark you, in any mere skirmish of the company, but in a stricken field with the great lion banner waving over us, and the red oriflamme in front, amid the shouting of my fellows and the twanging of the strings. But let it be sword, lance, or bolt that strikes me down, for I should think it shame to die from an iron ball of the fire drake or bombard, or any such unsoldierly weapon, which is only fitted to scare babes with its foolish noise and smoke."
"I have heard much even in the quiet cloisters of these new and dreadful engines," quoth Alleyne. "It is said, though I can scarce bring myself to believe it, that they will send a ball twice as far as a bowman can shoot his shaft, and with such force as to break through armor of proof."
"True enough, my lad. But while the armorer is thrusting in his devil's dust, and dropping his ball and lighting his flambeau, I can very easily loose 6 shafts, or 8 maybe, so he hath no great vantage after all. Yet I will not deny that in the intaking of a town it is well to have a good store of bombards. I am told that at Calais they made dints in the wall that a man might put his head into. But surely, comrades, some one who is grievously hurt hath passed along this road before us."
All along the woodland track there did indeed run a scattered straggling trail of blood marks, sometimes in single drops, and in other places in broad ruddy gouts smudged over the dead leaves or crimsoning the white flint stones.
"It must be a stricken deer," said John. "Nay, I am woodman enough to see that no deer hath passed this way this morning, and yet the blood is fresh.
But hark to the sound!" They stood listening, all three with sidelong heads. Through the silence of the great forest there came a swishing, whistling sound,
mingled with the most dolorous groans, and the voice of a man raised in a high quavering kind of song. The comrades hurried onwards eagerly, and topping the brow of a small rising they saw upon the other side the source from which these strange noises arose. A tall man, much stooped in the shoulders, was walking slowly with bended head and clasped hands in the centre of the path. He was dressed from head to foot in a long white linen cloth, and a high white cap with a red cross printed upon it. His gown was turned back from his shoulders, and the flesh there was a sight to make a man wince, for it was all beaten to a pulp, and the blood was soaking into his gown and trickling down upon the ground. Behind him walked a smaller man, with his hair touched with gray, who was clad in the same white garb. He intoned a long whining rhyme in the French tongue, and at the end of every line he raised a thick cord, all jagged with pellets of lead, and smote his companion across the shoulders until the blood spurted again. Even as the three wayfarers stared, however, there was a sudden change, for the smaller man, having finished his song, loosened his own gown and handed the scourge to the other, who took up the stave once more and lashed his companion with all the strength of his bare and sinewy arm. So, alternately beating and beaten, they made their dolorous way through the beautiful woods and under the amber arches of the fading beech trees, where the calm strength and majesty of nature might serve to rebuke the foolish energies and misspent strivings of mankind. Such a spectacle was new to Hordle John or to Alleyn Edricson, but the archer treated it lightly, as a common matter enough.
These are the beating friars, otherwise called the flagellants," quoth he. "I marvel that you should have come upon none of them before, for across the water they are as common as gallybaggers. I have heard that there are no English among them, but they are from France, Italy, and Bohemia. En avant, mes camarades, that we may have speech with them." As they came up to them, Alleyne could hear the doleful dirge which the beater was chanting, bringing down his heavy whip at the end of each line, while the groans of the sufferer formed a sort of dismal chorus. It was in old French, and ran somewhat in this way: En avant entre nous tous frères, battons nos charognes bien fort, en remembrant la grande misère de Dieu et sa piteuse mort, qui fut pris en la jonc amère, et vendu et très à tort, et bastu sa chair, vierge et d'air, au nom de ce bâton plus fort. Then at the end of the verse the scourge changed hands, and the chanting began anew. "Truly, holy fathers," said the archer in French as they came abreast of them, "you have beaten enough for to day. The road is all spotted like a shambles at Martinmas. Why should you mishandle yourselves thus?"
"C'est pour vos pêches," they droned, looking at the travellers with sad, lack lustre eyes, and then bent to their bloody work once more, without heed to the prayers and persuasions which were addressed to them. Finding all remonstrance useless, the three comrades hastened on their way, leaving these strange travellers to their dreary task.
"Mort Dieu!" cried the bowman, "there is a bucketful or more of my blood over in France, but it was all spilled in hot fight, and I should think twice before I drew it drop by drop as these friars are doing. By my hilt, our young one here is as white as a Picardy cheese. What is amiss then, mon cher?"
"It is nothing," Alleyne answered. "My life has been too quiet. I am not used to such sights."
"Ma foi!" the other cried. "I have never yet seen a man who was so stout of speech and yet so weak of heart." "Not so, friend," quoth big John. "It is not weakness of heart, for I know the lad well. His heart is as good as thine or mine, but he hath more in his pate than ever you will carry under that tin pot of thine, and as a consequence he can see further into things, so that they weigh upon him more." "Surely to any man it is a sad sight," said Alleyne, "to see these holy men, who have done no sin themselves, suffering so for the sins of others. Saints are they, if in this age any may merit so high a name." "I count them not a fly," cried Hordle John, "for who is the better for all their whipping and yowling? They are like the other friars, I trow, when all's done. Let them leave their backs alone, and beat the pride out of their hearts." "By the three kings, there is sooth in what you say," remarked the archer. Besides, methinks if I were le bon Dieu it would bring me little joy to see a poor devil cutting the flesh off his bones, and I should think that he had but a small opinion of me that he should hope to please me by such provost martial work. No, by my hilt, I should look with a more loving eye upon a jolly archer who never harmed a fallen foe and never feared a hale one."
"Doubtless you mean no sin," said Alleyne. "If your words are wild, it is not for me to judge them. Can you not see that there are other foes in this world besides Frenchmen, and as much glory to be gained in conquering them? Would it not be a proud day for knight or squire if he could overthrow 7 adversaries in the lists? Yet here are we in the lists of life, and there come the 7 black champions against us: Sir Pride, Sir Covetousness, Sir Lust, Sir Anger, Sir Gluttony, Sir Envy, and Sir Sloth. Let a man lay those 7 low, and he shall have the prize of the day from the hands of the fairest queen of beauty, even from the Virgin Mother herself. It is for this that these men mortify their flesh, and to set us an example who would pamper ourselves overmuch. I say again that they are God's own saints, and I bow my head to them."
"And so you shall, mon petit," replied the archer. "I have not heard a man speak better since old Dom Bertrand died, who was at one time chaplain to the White Company. He was a very valiant man, but at the battle of Brignais he was spitted through the body by a Hainault man at arms. For this we had an excommunication read against the man when next we saw our holy father at Avignon. But we had not his name, and knew nothing of him, save that he rode a dapple gray roussin. I have feared sometimes that the blight may have settled upon the wrong man."
"Your company has been then to bow knee before our holy father, the Pope Urban, the prop and centre of Christendom?" asked Alleyne, much interested. "Perchance you have yourself set eyes upon his august face."
"Twice I saw him," said the archer. "He was a lean little rat of a man with a scab upon his chin. The first time we had 5,000 crowns out of him, though he made much ado about it. The second time we asked 10,000, but it was 3 days before we could come to terms, and I am of the opinion myself that we might have done better by plundering the palace. His chamberlain and cardinals came forth, as I remember, to ask whether we would take 7,000 crowns with his blessing and a plenary absolution, or the 10,000 with his solemn ban by bell, book, and candle. We were all of one mind that it was best to have the 10,000 with the curse, but in some way they prevailed upon Sir John, so that we were blessed and shriven against our will. Perchance it is as well, for the company were in need of it about that time."
The pious Alleyne was deeply shocked by this reminiscence. Involuntarily he glanced up and around to see if there were any trace of those opportune levin flashes and thunderbolts which in the acta sanctorum were wont so often to cut short the loose talk of the scoffer. The autumn sun streamed down as brightly as ever, and the peaceful red path still wound in front of them through the rustling yellow tinted forest. Nature seemed to be too busy with her own concerns to heed the dignity of an outraged pontiff. Yet he felt a sense of weight and reproach within his breast, as though he had sinned himself in giving ear to such words. The teachings of 20 years cried out against such license. It was not until he had thrown himself down before one of the many wayside crosses, and had prayed from his heart both for the archer and for himself, that the dark cloud rolled back again from his spirit. End of chapter 7.
Chapter 8 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 8. The Three Friends. His companions had passed on while he was at his orisons, but his young blood and the fresh morning air both invited him to a scamper. His staff in one hand and his scrip in the other, with springy step and floating locks, he raced along the forest path, as active and as graceful as a young deer. He had not far to go, however, for on turning a corner he came on a roadside cottage with a wooden fence work around it, where stood big John and Aylward the bowman, staring at something within. As he came up with them he saw that two little lads, one about 9 years of age and the other somewhat older, were standing on the plot in front of the cottage, each holding out a round stick in their left hands, with their arms stiff and straight from the shoulder, as silent and still as two small statues. They were pretty, blue-eyed, yellow-haired lads, well made and sturdy, with bronzed skins which spoke of woodland life.
"Here are young chips from an old bow stave," cried the soldier in great delight. "This is the proper way to raise children. By my hilt, I could not have trained them better if I had the ordering of it myself."
"What is it, then?" asked Hordle John. "They stand very stiff, and I trust they have not been struck so."
"Nay, they are training their left arms that they may have a steady grasp of the bow. So my own father trained me, and 6 days a week I held out his walking staff till my arm was as heavy as lead. Hola, mes enfants, how long will you hold out?"
"Until the sun is over the great lime tree, good master," the elder answered.
"What would you be then? Woodmen? Verderers?"
"Nay, soldiers," they cried both together.
"By the beard of my father, but ye are whelps of the true breed. Why so keen then to be soldiers?"
"That we may fight the Scots," they answered. "Daddy will send us to fight the Scots."
"And why the Scots, my pretty lads? We have seen French and Spanish galleys no further away than Southampton, but I doubt it will be some time before the Scots find their way to these parts."
"Our business is with the Scots," quoth the elder, "for it was the Scots who cut off Daddy's string fingers and his thumbs."
"Aye, lads, it was that," said a deep voice from behind Alleyne's shoulder. Looking round, the wayfarers saw a gaunt, big boned man with sunken cheeks and a sallow face, who had come up behind them. He held up his two hands as he spoke, and showed that the thumbs and two first fingers had been torn away from each of them.
"Ma foi, camarade," cried Aylward, "who hath served thee in so shameful a fashion?"
"It is easy to see, friend, that you were born far from the marches of Scotland," quoth the stranger with a bitter smile. "North of Humber there is no man who would not know the handiwork of Devil Douglas, the Black Lord James." "And how fell you into his hands?" asked John. "I am a man of the north country, from the town of Beverley and the wapentake of Holderness," he answered. "There was a day when from Trent to Tweed there was no better marksman than Robin Heathcote. Yet, as you see, he hath left me, as he hath left many another poor border archer, with no grip for bill or bow. Yet the king hath given me a living here in the southlands, and, please God, these two lads of mine will pay off a debt that has been owing over long. What's the price of Daddy's thumbs, boys?" "20 Scottish lives," they answered together. "And for the fingers?" "Half a score." "When they can bend my war bow and bring down a squirrel at 100 paces, I send them to take service under Johnny Copeland, the Lord of the Marches and Governor of Carlisle. By my soul, I would give the rest of my fingers to see the Douglas within arrow flight of them."
"May you live to see it," quoth the bowman. "And hark ye, mes enfants, take an old soldier's rede and lay your bodies to the bow, drawing from hip and thigh as much as from arm. Learn also, I pray you, to shoot with a dropping shaft, for though a bowman may at times be called upon to shoot straight and fast, yet it is more often that he has to do with a town guard behind a wall, or an arbalester with his mantlet raised, when you cannot hope to do him scathe unless your shaft fall straight upon him from the clouds. I have not drawn string for 2 weeks, but I may be able to show you how such shots may be made." He loosed his longbow, slung his quiver round to the front, and then glanced keenly round for a fitting mark. There was a yellow and withered stump some way off, seen under the drooping branches of a lofty oak. The archer measured the distance with his eye, and then, drawing 3 shafts, he shot them off with such speed that the first had not reached the mark ere the last one was on the string. Each arrow passed high over the oak, and of the 3, 2 struck fair into the stump, while the third, caught in some wandering puff of wind, was driven a foot or 2 to one side. "Good!"
cried the north countryman. "Hearken to him, lads. He is a master bowman. Your dad says amen to every word he says."
"By my hilt," said Aylward, "if I am to preach on bowmanship, the whole long day would scarce give me time for my sermon. We have marksmen in the company who will notch with a shaft every crevice and joint of a man at arms' harness, from the clasp of his bassinet to the hinge of his greave. But with your favour, friend, I must gather my arrows again, for while a shaft costs a penny, a poor man can scarce leave them sticking in wayside stumps. We must then on our road again, and I hope from my heart that you may train these two young goshawks here until they are ready for a cast even at such a quarry as you speak of." Leaving the thumbless archer and his brood, the wayfarers struck through the scattered huts of Emery Down and out on to the broad rolling heath, covered deep in ferns and in heather, where droves of the half wild Black Forest pigs were rooting about amongst the hillocks. The woods about this point fall away to the left and the right, while the road curves upwards and the wind sweeps keenly over the swelling uplands. The broad strips of bracken glowed red and yellow against the black peaty soil, and a queenly doe, who grazed among them, turned her white front and her great questioning eyes towards the wayfarers. Alleyne gazed in admiration at the supple beauty of the creature, but the archer's fingers played with his quiver, and his eyes glistened with the fell instinct which urges a man to slaughter. "Tete Dieu!" he growled. "Were this France or even Guienne, we should have a fresh haunch for our known meat. Law or no law, I have a mind to loose a bolt at her." "I would break your stave across my knee first," cried John, laying his great hand upon the bow. "What, man! I am forest born, and I know what comes of it. In our township of Hoardle two have lost their eyes, and one his skin for this very thing. On my troth, I felt no great love when I first saw you, but since then I have conceived overmuch regard for you to wish to see the verderer's flayer at work upon you." "It is my trade to risk my skin," growled the archer; but none the less he thrust his quiver over his hip again and turned his face for the west. As they advanced, the path still tended upwards, running from heath into copses of holly and yew, and so back into heath again. It was joyful to hear the merry whistle of blackbirds as they darted from one clump of greenery to the other. Now and again a peaty amber colored stream rippled across their way, with ferny overgrown banks, where the blue kingfisher flitted busily from side to side, or the gray and pensive heron, swollen with trout and dignity, stood ankle deep among the sedges. Chattering jays and loud wood pigeons flapped thickly overhead, while ever and anon the measured tapping of nature's carpenter, the great green woodpecker, sounded from each wayside grove. On either side, as the path mounted, the long sweep of country broadened and expanded, sloping down on the one side through yellow forest and brown moor to the distant smoke of Lymington and the blue misty channel which lay alongside the skyline, while to the north the woods rolled away, grove topping grove, to where in the farthest distance the white spire of Salisbury stood out hard and clear against the cloudless sky. To Alleyne, whose days had been spent in the low lying coastland, the eager upland air and the wide free countryside gave a sense of life and of joy of living which made his young blood tingle in his veins. Even the heavy John was not unmoved by the beauty of their road, while the bowman whistled lustily or sang snatches of French love songs in a voice which might have scared the most stout hearted maiden that ever hearkened to serenade. "I have a liking for that north countryman," he remarked presently. "He hath a good power of hatred. Couldst see by his cheek and eye that he is as bitter as verjuice. I warm to a man who hath some gall in his liver."
"Ah me!" sighed Alleyne. "Would it not be better if he had some love in his heart?"
"I would not say nay to that. By my hilt, I never shall be said to be a traitor to the little king. Let a man love the sex. Pasque Dieu, they are made to be loved, les petites, from wimple down to shoestring. I am right glad, mon garcon, to see that the good monks have trained thee so wisely and so well."
"Nay, I meant not worldly love, but rather that his heart should soften towards those who have wronged him."
The archer shook his head. "A man should love those of his own breed," said he. "But it is not nature that an English born man should love a Scot or a Frenchman. Ma foi, you have not seen a drove of Nithsdale raiders on their Galloway nags, or you would not speak of loving them. I would as soon take Beelzebub himself to my arms. I fear, mon gar, that they have taught thee but badly at Beaulieu, for surely a bishop knows more of what is right and what is ill than an abbot can do, and I myself with these very eyes saw the Bishop of Lincoln hew into a Scottish hobbler with a battle axe, which was a passing strange way of showing him that he loved him."
Alleyne scarce saw his way to argue in the face of so decided an opinion on the part of a high dignitary of the church. "You have borne arms against the Scots, then?" he asked.
"Why, man, I first loosed string in battle when I was but a lad, younger by 2 years than you, at Neville's Cross, under the Lord Mowbray. Later I served under the Warden of Berwick, that very John Copeland of whom our friend spoke, the same who held the King of Scots to ransom. Ma foi, it is rough soldiering, and a good school for one who had learned to be hardy and war wise."
"I have heard that the Scots are good men of war," said Hordle John.
"For axemen and spearmen I have not seen their match," the archer answered. "They can travel too with a bag of meal and a gridiron slung to their sword belt, so that it is ill to follow them. There are scant crops and few beeves in the borderland, where a man must reap his grain with a sickle in one fist and a brown bill in the other. On the other hand, they are the sorriest archers that I have ever seen, and cannot so much as aim with the arbalest, to say naught of the longbow. Again, they are mostly poor folk, even the nobles among them, so that there are few who can buy as good a brigandine of chain mail as that which I am wearing, and it is ill for them to stand up against our own knights, who carry the price of 5 Scotch farms upon their chest and shoulders. Man for man, with equal weapons, they are as worthy and valiant men as could be found in the whole of Christendom."
"And the French?" asked Alleyne, to whom the archer's light gossip had all the relish that the words of the man of action have for the recluse.
"The French are also very worthy men. We have had great good fortune in France, and it hath led to much bobbance and camp fire talk, but I have ever noticed that those who know the most have the least to say about it. I have seen Frenchmen fight both in the open field, in the intaking and the defending of towns or castle wicks, in escalados, camisades, night forays, bushments, sallies, outfalls, and nightly spear runnings. Their knights and squires, lad, are every whit as good as ours, and I could pick out a score of those who ride behind Du Guesclin, who would hold the lists with sharpened lances against the best men in the army of England. On the other hand, their common folk are so crushed down with gabelle and poll tax and every manner of cursed tallage that the spirit has passed right out of them. It is a fool's plan to teach a man to be a cur in peace, and think that he will be a lion in war. Fleece them like sheep, and sheep they will remain. If the nobles had not conquered the poor folk, it is like enough that we should have not conquered the nobles."
"But they must be sorry folk to bow down to the rich in such a fashion," said Big John. "I am but a poor commoner of England myself, and yet I know something of charters, liberties, franchises, usages, privileges, customs, and the like. If these be broken, then all men know that it is time to buy arrowheads."
"Aye, but the men of the law are strong in France as well as the men of war. By my hilt, I hold that a man has more to fear there from the ink pot of one of them than from the iron of the other. There is ever some cursed sheepskin in their strong boxes to prove that the rich man should be richer and the poor man poorer. It would scarce pass in England, but they are quiet folk over the water."
"And what other nations have you seen in your travels, good sir?" asked Alleyn Edricson. His young mind hungered for plain facts of life, after the long course of speculation and of mysticism on which he had been trained.
"I have seen the Low Countryman in arms, and I have naught to say against him. Heavy and slow is he by nature, and is not to be brought into battle for the sake of a lady's eyelash or the twang of a minstrel's string, like the hotter blood of the south. But, ma foi, lay hand on his wool bales, or trifle with his velvet of Bruges, and out buzzes every stout burgher like bees from the tea hole, ready to lay on as though it were his one business in life. By Our Lady, they have shown the French in Courtrai and elsewhere that they are as deft in wielding steel as in welding it."
"And the men of Spain?"
"They too are very hardy soldiers, the more so for many hundred years they have had to fight hard against the cursed followers of the Black Mahud, who have pressed upon them from the south, and still, as I understand, hold the fairer half of the country. I had a turn with them upon the sea when they came over to Winchelsea, and the good queen had her ladies sat upon the cliffs looking down at us, as if it had been a joust or tourney. By my hilt, it was a sight that was worth the seeing, for all that was best in England was out on the water that day. We went forth in little ships and came back in great galleys, for of 50 tall ships of Spain over 200 flew the cross of St. George ere the sun had set. But now, youngster, I have answered you freely, and I trow it is time that you answered me. Let things be plat and plain between us. I am a man who shoots straight at his mark. You saw the things I had with me at yonder hostel. Name which you will, save only the box of rose colored sugar which I take to the Lady Loring, and you shall have it if you will but come with me to France."
"Nay," said Alleyne, "I would gladly come with ye to France, or where else ye will, just to list to your talk, and because ye are the only two friends that I have in the whole wide world outside of the cloisters. But indeed it may not be, for my duty is towards my brother, seeing that father and mother are dead, and he my elder. Besides, when ye talk of taking me to France, ye do not conceive how useless I should be to you, seeing that neither by training nor my nature am I fitted for the wars, and there seems to be naught but strife in those parts."
"That comes from my fool's talk," cried the archer; "for being a man of no learning myself, my tongue turns to blades and targets, even as my hand does. Know then that for every parchment in England there are 20 in France. For every statue, cut gem, shrine, carven screen, or what else might please the eye of a learned clerk, there are a good 100 to our one. At the spoiling of Carcassonne I have seen chambers stored with writing, though not one man in our company could read them. Again, in Arles and Nimes, and other towns that I could name, there are the great arches and fortalices still standing, which were built of old by giant men who came from the south. Can I not see by your brightened eye how you would love to look upon these things? Come then with me, and by these 10 finger bones there is not one of them which you shall not see."
"I should indeed love to look upon them," Alleyne answered, "but I have come from Beaulieu for a purpose, and I must be true to my service, even as thou art true to thine."
"Bethink you again, mon ami," quoth Aylward, "that you might do much good yonder, since there are 300 men in the company, and none who has ever a word of grace for them, and yet the Virgin knows there was never a set of men who were in more need of it. Sickly the one duty may balance the other. Your brother hath done without you this many a year, and, as I gather, he hath never walked as far as Beaulieu to see you during all that time, so he cannot be in any great need of you."
"Besides," said John, "the Socman of Minstead is a byword through the forest from Bramshaw Hill to Holmesley Walk. He is a drunken, brawling, perilous churl, as you may find at your cost."
"The more reason that I should strive to mend him," quoth Alleyne. "There is no need to urge me, friends, for my own wishes would draw me to France, and it would be a joy to me if I could go with you. But indeed and indeed it cannot be, so here I take my leave of you, for yonder square tower amongst the trees upon the right must surely be the church of Minstead, and I may reach it by this path through the woods."
"Well, God be with thee, lad," cried the archer, pressing Alleyne to his heart. "I am quick to love and quick to hate, and 'fore God I am loath to part."
"Would it not be well," said John, "that we should wait here and see what manner of greeting you have from your brother? You may prove to be as welcome as the king's purveyor to the village dame."
"Nay, nay," he answered, "ye must not bide for me, for where I go I stay."
"Yet it may be as well that you should know whither we go," said the archer. "We shall now journey south through the woods until we come out upon the Christchurch road, and so onwards, hoping to night to reach the castle of Sir William Montacute, Earl of Salisbury, of which Sir Nigel Loring is constable. There we shall bide, and it is like enough that for a month or more you may find us there ere we are ready for our viage back to France."
It was hard indeed for Alleyne to break away from these two new but hearty friends, and so strong was the combat between his conscience and his inclinations that he dared not look round lest his resolution should slip away from him. It was not until he was deep among the tree trunks that he cast a glance backwards, when he found that he could still see them through the branches on the road above him. The archer was standing with folded arms, his bow jutting from over his shoulder, and the sun gleaming brightly upon his headpiece and the links of his chain mail. Beside him stood his giant recruit, still clad in the homespun and ill fitting garments of the fuller of Lymington, with arms and legs shooting out of his scanty garb. Even as Alleyne watched them, they turned upon their heels and plodded off together upon their way. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 9. How strange things befell in Minstead Wood. The path which the young clerk had now to follow lay through a magnificent forest of the very heaviest timber, where the giant boles of oak and of beech formed long aisles in every direction, shooting up their huge branches to build the majestic arches of nature's own cathedral. Beneath lay a broad carpet of the softest and greenest moss, flecked over with fallen leaves, but yielding pleasantly to the foot of the traveller. The track which guided him was one so seldom used that in places it lost itself entirely among the grass, to reappear as a reddish rut between the distant tree trunks. It was very still here in the heart of the woodlands. The gentle rustle of the branches and the distant cooing of pigeons were the only sounds which broke in upon the silence, save that once Alleyne heard far off a merry call upon a hunting bugle and the shrill yapping of the hounds. It was not without some emotion that he looked upon the scene around him, for, in spite of his secluded life, he knew enough of the ancient greatness of his own family to be aware that the time had been when they had held undisputed and paramount sway over all that tract of country. His father could trace his pure Saxon lineage back to that Godfrey Malf, who had held the manors of Bisterne and of Minstead at the time when the Norman first set mailed foot upon English soil. The afforestation of the district, however, and its conversion into a royal domain, had clipped off a large section of his estate, while other parts had been confiscated as a punishment for his supposed complicity in an abortive Saxon rising. The fate of the ancestor had been typical of that of his descendants. During 300 years their domains had gradually contracted, sometimes through royal or feudal encroachment, and sometimes through such gifts to the church as that with which Alleyne's father had opened the doors of Beaulieu Abbey to his younger son. The importance of the family had thus dwindled, but they still retained the old Saxon manor house, with a couple of farms and a grove large enough to afford pannage to 100 pigs, silva decentum porcis, as the old family parchments described it. Above all, the owner of the soil could still hold his head high as the veritable Socman of Minstead, that is, as holding the land in free socage, with no feudal superior, and answerable to no man lower than the king. Knowing this, Alleyne felt some little glow of worldly pride as he looked for the first time upon the land with which so many generations of his ancestors had been associated. He pushed on the quicker, twirling his staff merrily, and looking out at every turn of the path for some sign of the old Saxon residence.